Every story here started as an ordinary moment. A reception with drinks, a day out in the desert, a radio contest for a children's toy. From a young man aiming a shotgun into the Arizona sun, to a lawyer setting himself for a run at a pane of high-rise glass 24 floors up. Each of these began as something no one thought twice about. None of them died to fate. They died to a chain of small, avoidable things that happened to line up on the wrong day. Stay with me. On the morning of July 9th, 1993, the Toronto Dominion Bank Tower stood the way it always did, a wall of glass against the sky. Inside, on the 24th floor, a corporate lawyer named Gary Hoy was hosting law students at a firm reception. Hoy was 38, sharp, well-liked, and he had a party trick that his colleagues had seen more than once. Hoy had trained as an engineer before he practiced law, and he loved the building he worked in. He especially loved the windows. He would tell visitors that the glass was so strong you could throw yourself at it, and it would hold. And to prove it, he would do exactly that. He would take a run at a window pane and body check it, and it would hold, and everyone would laugh, and that was the point. It was a demonstration of confidence in the place he worked, a way to impress the young people who had come to see what a big firm looked like from the inside. That evening, in front of the students, he did it again. He took his run and threw his shoulder into a 24th floor window. And here is the cruel part, the detail that makes this case so hard to shake. The glass did not break. It never broke. It did exactly what Hoy had always said it would do. But the pane itself popped cleanly out of its frame, and Gary Hoy went through the opening and fell 24 stories to the courtyard below. He died on impact. Emergency crews arrived within minutes, but there was nothing to be done. He had died from the trauma of the fall, in front of the guests he had been trying to reassure. In the days that followed, a spokesperson for the firm confirmed the strange truth of it. The glass was strong, exactly as strong as Hoy believed. It was the frame holding the pane that failed. Building engineers later noted that the glazing met every code and standard it was supposed to meet. What no standard accounted for was a grown man repeatedly slamming his full body weight into a window. A pane of glass is designed to sit in its frame against wind and weather. It is not designed to be tackled. Do it enough times, and something eventually gives. That is the irony that has kept this story alive for 30 years. Hoy set out to prove the window was unbreakable, and it was. The glass won. It was the frame that lost, and it took him with it. One colleague, trying to make sense of it, said afterward that at least Gary had died doing something he loved, testing glass, a line that shows just how ordinary the whole routine had become in that office. Nobody there thought of it as a risk. It was a habit, a thing Gary did, right up until the moment it wasn't. If you're already thinking how easily something like this becomes routine before it becomes fatal, you're not alone. Subscribe and stay with me. In 1982, in the open desert near Lake Pleasant, north of Phoenix, Arizona, a 20-year-old named David Grundman was out with a friend and a shotgun, looking for something to shoot. The Arizona desert offers a strange kind of target, the giant saguaro cactus, the tall, arm-branched plant that stands like a silhouette against every western sunset. Some of them are enormous. Some of them are older than the state itself. Grundman picked one of the big ones. It was estimated to be well over 100 years old, a towering column of green with heavy arms reaching out from the trunk. He began firing shotgun slugs into it, and the plant took the punishment the way old wood takes an axe, slowly, then all at once. One of his shots struck near the base of a massive arm. A saguaro is not soft. Beneath the skin it holds a woody skeleton and a huge volume of water, which is what makes it so heavy. That single arm, weakened by the blast, weighed several hundred pounds. When it gave way, it came down from a height of several meters, and David Grundman was standing beneath it. The arm crushed him. He died almost immediately, there in the desert he'd come out to enjoy. His friend called for help, but emergency crews could do nothing when they arrived. Authorities recorded the death as blunt force trauma from the falling cactus limb, dislodged by the shotgun blasts. It was, in the plainest terms, an accident that the victim had set in motion himself. What investigators and locals both understood was something Grundman may not have. A saguaro is not a bottle on a fence post. It is a living structure that can weigh thousands of pounds when full of water, and when you damage its core, the collapse is unpredictable. A section can twist, or lean, or drop straight down without warning. There is no safe way to know which way a wounded saguaro will fall. There is a legal layer to the story, too. In Arizona, saguaros are protected by law. Damaging one can be a criminal offense because these plants take so long to grow and mean so much to the desert ecosystem. So Grundman was not only in danger, he was also breaking a law that exists partly to keep people from treating these giants like disposable targets. The detail that has followed this case through every retelling is the grim symmetry of it. He fired on the cactus, and in the only way a plant can, the cactus answered. It didn't defend itself. It simply obeyed gravity, and gravity does not care what you intended. A century of slow growth came down in a single second onto the young man who had decided to knock it apart for fun. It is a story people tell to get a reaction. But underneath the shock is a very simple lesson about mass and height and the things we assume are harmless because they don't move on their own. Early on the morning of February 4th, 1912, a small crowd gathered at the foot of the Eiffel Tower in Paris. Among them was Franz Reichelt, a 33-year-old tailor born in Austria who had made his life in France. He had a nickname in the press, the Flying Tailor, and on that cold morning, he intended to earn it. Reichelt was an inventor as much as a tailor. He had designed a parachute built into a coat, a wearable suit that he believed could save the lives of pilots forced to leap from their aircraft. Aviation was brand new, and men were dying in it. Reichelt was convinced his suit was the answer. He had petitioned the authorities for permission to test it from the tower, and he had won that permission on a condition. The test would use a dummy, a weighted mannequin dropped from the platform to prove the design before anyone risked a life. That was the plan the officials agreed to. It was not the plan Reichelt carried out. Standing on the tower's first platform, about 57 meters up, some 187 feet above the frozen ground, Reichelt changed his mind. He would not use a dummy. He would jump himself. The journalists there to film a test of a mannequin found themselves filming something else entirely. He stepped up onto a small table set against the guardrail, adjusted his suit, and hesitated for a long moment while the cameras rolled. Then he climbed the rail and stepped off. The suit did almost nothing. It barely opened, folding around him instead of catching the air, and he fell without resistance the entire way down. He struck the frozen soil and died on impact, in front of the crowd and the cameras that had come to record his triumph. Officials who examined the suit afterward were blunt about why it failed. It was too heavy and not aerodynamic enough. It simply did not have the surface area to slow a falling human body from that height. The design had never been proven at any smaller scale. There had been no incremental testing, no low drop, no dummy, none of the careful staging that experimental engineering demands. He had gone straight to the highest, most public test possible. And that is the tragedy layered inside the spectacle. Reichelt was not a thrill seeker. He was a man trying to invent something that would save lives, and he believed in it so completely that he was willing to stake his own life on it as proof. The very conviction that drove his invention is what killed him. He skipped the safe steps because he was certain he didn't need them. The footage still exists. You can watch him stand on that ledge, gather himself, and go. One later summary described the outcome with brutal economy, saying he achieved nothing but a frown-shaped dent in the cement. It sounds cruel, and it is, but it also captures the bitter distance between what he hoped to prove and what actually happened. He wanted to show the world a device that could catch a falling man. Instead, he showed the world exactly why you test the parachute first. On January 12, 2007, at the studios of a Sacramento radio station, a 28-year-old mother of 3 took part in a contest with a name built for a laugh. Hold your Wii for a Wii. The prize was a Nintendo Wii, the game console every child wanted that year, and few families could easily afford. She entered it for her kids. The rules were simple, and it turned out dangerous. Contestants drank large amounts of water over a short period and competed to see who could go the longest without urinating. The last one standing would win the console. She wanted that console for her children, and so she drank and kept drinking, taking in water in quantities the human body is not built to process that fast. Reports point to something on the order of several liters. There is a medical reality behind those numbers. When you drink an enormous volume of water quickly, you dilute the sodium in your blood. That imbalance, called hyponatremia, pulls water into your cells. Your brain, sealed inside your skull with no room to expand, begins to swell. It starts with a headache. It can end in seizures, coma, and death. She left the station complaining of a severe headache. Later that day, she was found dead in her home. The county coroner ruled the cause as water intoxication, brought on directly by the contest. Her death set off a criminal investigation and a civil lawsuit, and what came out was hard to hear. During the broadcast, on-air staff had actually joked about the health risks. Someone mentioned that a person could die from drinking too much water. They referenced a case where it had happened, and then the contest continued anyway. Nobody stopped it. In 2009, a jury found the station liable for wrongful death and awarded substantial damages to her family. The station faced regulatory scrutiny and lost its license. The warning was not hidden. It was spoken aloud, on the air, during the very contest that killed her. The danger of drinking too much water too fast is documented in medical literature and was known well enough that the people running the show could name it. And still the game went on, because it was funny, because it was good radio, because no one in that room treated the risk as real. That is the part that stays with you. She did nothing extreme by her own reckoning. She drank water. Water is the safest thing in the world, the thing we are told to drink more of. She followed the rules of a contest that a licensed radio station chose to run, and those rules required her to do something medically unsafe. She was trying to win a toy for her children, and the disproportion between that small, loving goal and what it cost her is almost impossible to sit with. There was no daredevil stunt here, no cliff, no shotgun. Just a mother, a plastic bottle, and a game that should never have been played. Not every avoidable death is modern. On the 5th of August, in the year 882, a young king of West Francia named Louis III died in a way no chronicler expected, and no army could have prevented. Louis was around 18 years old, and already a king, ruling part of what would later become France. He was, by the standards of his time, at the height of his power. The accounts of his death come to us through medieval chronicles, and like most records from that era, they carry the biases and simplifications of the people who wrote them. But the core of the story has been treated by historians as credible for more than 1,000 years. According to those accounts, Louis was on horseback near Saint-Denis, pursuing a young woman. Some versions describe it as an attempted assault. A king using his position and his horse to chase down a woman who wanted nothing to do with him. She ran for shelter, ducking into a house through a low doorway, the kind common in the buildings of the age, built for people on foot, not for men on horseback. Lewis, moving fast and unwilling to stop, tried to follow her straight through the entrance while still mounted. He did not clear it. His head struck the lintel, the heavy beam across the top of the doorframe, with tremendous force. The blow either threw him from his horse or caused a catastrophic head injury on its own. He died shortly afterward from the trauma. The death was sudden, and, for a kingdom, enormously consequential. Louis was buried at the royal necropolis of Saint-Denis, and his brother Carloman succeeded him, shifting the balance of power in West Francia in a single afternoon. The chronicles frame it as a freak accident, the collision of reckless pursuit and low architecture. A man who commanded armies, who could have died gloriously in battle in the eyes of his own age, instead died because he rode at speed into a doorway that any person on foot would have simply stepped through. Later writers seized on the moral of it, the idea of a king brought down not by a rival, but by his own conduct and a common piece of building. What lingers is that contrast. Everything about Lewis's position made his death feel like it should have meant something grand. Instead, it was mundane in the most literal sense. A beam of wood, set at the height of an ordinary door, ended the reign of a king because he would not slow down. The gap between his power and the smallness of what killed him is exactly why the story survived across the centuries. Some cases reach us with almost none of the usual detail. No name, no date, no city. Just the essential, terrible shape of what happened, repeated by people who heard it and couldn't forget it. This is one of those. A woman, an adult, took part in a drinking challenge, not alcohol. Water. The goal was to drink an extreme volume of water in a short span of time, motivated by a competition and the promise of some prize at the end of it. The figure that comes down to us is around 6 liters, consumed quickly. 6 liters of water, taken in fast, overwhelms the body's ability to keep its chemistry in balance. As with the radio contest, the mechanism is hyponatremia. The flood of water dilutes the sodium in the blood until the body's cells, following the simple physics of water, moving toward where there is less salt, begin to swell. In the brain, that swelling has nowhere to go. The early signs are a headache and nausea, then confusion, then seizures. Then, in the worst cases, the brain swells enough to shut down the body's most basic functions, and breathing stops. She developed those complications and died from them. A medical examination attributed her death to water intoxication, not to any underlying illness. She had been healthy. It was the water that killed her. This case is thin on specifics, and it would be wrong to invent the ones that are missing. What we can say for certain is the thing the story exists to teach. Water is not automatically safe, simply because it is water. The dose makes the poison, and there is a volume and a speed at which even the most harmless substance in the world becomes lethal. Sports medicine and emergency medicine both document these cases because they keep happening, usually in contests and challenges where the point is to push past what the body wants to do. Where organizers have been involved in cases like this, investigators have pointed to the same failure again and again. No one recognized the distress in time, and no one consulted the plain medical guidance on safe limits before letting the challenge run. The signs were there to be read. They just weren't read. What makes this one land, even without a name, is the disproportion at the heart of it. A person died chasing a small prize, or a moment of winning, a pointless challenge against a risk that basic health guidance had already flagged. The reward was trivial. The cost was everything. And she almost certainly had no idea, right up to the end, that plain water in a plastic jug could do what it did. This case, too, comes down to us as an anecdote rather than a full record. It has circulated online in the way these stories do, passed along because the shape of it is so striking, even though the specific name, date, and place are not preserved in the telling. An adult man had been cheating on his partner. At some point, he found himself on or near a balcony, and he realized he was about to be caught. What he did next was driven entirely by that fear of discovery. Rather than face the moment, he tried to avoid it, moving around the balcony, repositioning himself, perhaps trying to climb or hide, putting his body into a precarious spot at height that he never would have chosen in a calmer moment. He lost his balance. He fell from the balcony to the ground below, and the impact killed him. The framing of the story is consistent. There was no foul play, no one pushed him. It was an accidental fall, set off entirely by his own attempt to escape being seen. Because the details are so limited, it's worth being careful about what we actually know. In documented balcony falls that resemble this one, investigators typically attribute the cause to a loss of balance and unsafe movement at height, sometimes made worse by alcohol or by panic. The excerpt that carries this story does not confirm those factors, so we won't assume them. What remains is the core event: a man near a balcony edge, a moment of panic, a fatal fall. Balconies are among the most common fall hazards in ordinary life, and the safety guidance around them is simple to the point of being obvious. Stay well back from the edge. Don't climb. Don't lean out. Don't attempt anything at a railing that you wouldn't attempt standing safely on the ground. These are rules almost everyone knows, and almost everyone ignores at some point without consequence, which is exactly what makes the rare, fatal exception so jarring. The irony people fix on when they retell this one is moralistic. A man tried to hide a betrayal, and in trying to hide it, he put himself in the one position that ended his life. But strip away the judgment, and what's left is the same quiet lesson that runs through so many of these stories. Panic makes people take risks they would never take with a clear head. Fear of a small consequence pushed him toward a much larger one. He was not trying to do anything dangerous. He was trying to avoid an uncomfortable conversation. And the height did the rest. It is a reminder of how thin the margin is between a bad moment and a final one, and how often it's the ordinary features of our homes, a balcony, a railing, an edge, that draw the line. On the night of the 10th of February, 2017, Nicole Dufour was 45 years old and trying to get home. The Sacramento Valley had been hammered by one of the wettest winters Northern California had seen in years. Creeks that ran low and quiet most of the year had swollen into fast brown channels, and the rural roads around Glenn County had turned treacherous. Nicole lived in Orland, a small farming town northwest of Sacramento. There was nothing dramatic about her plan that night. She wanted to get back to familiar ground, and like a lot of people who know their local roads, she reportedly chose a rural back route near Ord Ferry Road, a shortcut, a way to shave a little time off a long, wet drive. Anyone who has lived in the countryside understands the instinct. You know these roads. You have driven them 100 times in daylight and never thought twice. But that stretch of road was no longer the road she knew. County authorities had closed a flooded section near a creek. They had set out barricades and posted warning signs across it, the standard response when low-lying pavement disappears under moving water. The closure was not a suggestion. It was a physical barrier, placed there precisely because that crossing had become deadly. Witnesses later told investigators what they saw. Nicole's vehicle did not stop at the barricades. It pulled off the normal roadway, drove around the barrier, and headed straight toward the flooded section despite the posted closure and the visible water ahead. What happens next happens fast, and that is the part most people underestimate. Floodwater that looks shallow and still can be neither. As her car entered the submerged stretch, the current from the swollen creek caught it. Moving water does not need to be deep to lift a vehicle. It only needs to be moving. The car was swept off the road, pushed into a ditch, and flipped upside down, where it became trapped in deep, fast water with Nicole still inside. Emergency responders were called, but the window for a flood rescue is brutally short. By the time crews reached the submerged vehicle, she could not be brought out alive. She was found inside the car, and the cause of death was reported as drowning. The investigation reached a plain conclusion. The road had been formally closed with both barricades and signage because of dangerous flood conditions, and she had driven around them into the water. Officials repeated the warning they give every flood season, that driving into floodwater is among the most underestimated risks there is, because moving water can sweep a car away in seconds, no matter how confident the driver feels. The hardest detail is the simplest one. As one account of the case put it, she drowned in her car, surrounded by signs that had been put there to save her life. A shortcut meant to save minutes ran straight into the one outcome the closure existed to prevent. If you want more of these, told carefully and with respect, subscribe and stay with me. What ties them together is closer to home than it looks. This one comes to us through the account of someone who worked at a beachside amusement park, and the location and the woman's name were never documented in the source, so we will tell it as the worker told it, plainly, with only what is known. The park sat near a stretch of seaside cliffs. They were beautiful in the way coastal cliffs always are, dramatic, weathered, framing the ocean behind a row of rocks that looked solid and permanent. They were not. The rock face was crumbling, eroding the way sea cliffs constantly do, and the staff knew it. Signs warned visitors away. Employees gave verbal warnings, again and again, telling people not to climb. And again, people climbed anyway. According to the worker, the cliffs were a magnet for photographs. Visitors wanted the dramatic shot, the figure standing high above the water with the sea stretching out behind them. The pull of that image was strong enough that warning signs and staff reminders simply slid off it. On the day in question, a woman decided to make the climb for a selfie. She made her way up onto the unstable rocks, out past the safer ground, to where the view and the drop were both at their most striking. She posed for her photos at the edge of a face that everyone who worked there knew was failing. While she was up there, part of the rock gave way beneath her. There was no warning in that moment, no slow crack to react to. The ground she was standing on simply was not there anymore, and she fell from the height to the hard surfaces below. Bystanders and park staff rushed to her. Emergency services were called, but the fall had caused fatal trauma, and despite the efforts around her, she was pronounced dead. What gives this case its weight is that it was not unusual. The worker described it as part of a pattern, noting that several people die each year falling from cliffs like these after ignoring the same warnings. That is the quiet horror of it. The signs were not posted because of one freak event. They were posted because the staff had watched this happen before and were trying, with paint and plywood and repeated reminders, to stop it happening again. The irony sits right in the photograph she was trying to take. The whole appeal of that spot, the height, the exposure, the edge of a crumbling cliff over open water, was the exact thing that made it lethal. The view she wanted was inseparable from the danger she was warned about. The location that promised the perfect image was the location that took her life. We do not know her name, and we cannot tell you the date. But we can tell you what the worker wanted people to understand: that the warnings were real, that the rock really was failing, and that the few seconds it takes to get a photo are not worth standing on ground that everyone around you is begging you to step back from. Brenda Turlock's story is one of the clearest in this entire collection, because two workers were present, both gave statements, and the sequence of events was documented from beginning to end. It happened in the early morning at a facility, industrial or commercial, that used solvent-based cleaning. Overnight, a cleaning process had left high concentrations of solvent vapor inside a narrow service corridor. The corridor was poorly ventilated, the kind of enclosed passage where air does not move and fumes do not clear on their own. They simply accumulate, hour after hour, in the dark. One of the workers discovered the problem and did exactly what he was supposed to do. He closed the corridor off. He placed warnings. The space was now restricted, not because anyone wanted to be difficult, but because the air inside it had quietly become poisonous. Brenda Turlock arrived wanting to pass through that corridor. To her, it likely looked like nothing more than a shortcut, a private passage someone was needlessly blocking. When the worker told her the corridor was restricted and unsafe because of the fumes, she did not accept it. According to his statement, she told him he had no authority over her and that she would go where she pleased. And then she did. She stepped around him and forced her way into the corridor, past the verbal warning and past the posted signs. Inside, the vapor that had built up overnight was waiting at dangerous concentration. This is not a hazard that gives you time to reconsider. Acute toxic inhalation works fast in an enclosed space. Within minutes, she lost consciousness and collapsed where she stood. The workers realized she had gone silent and unresponsive, and emergency services were called. But by the time anyone could reach her, she had already been in that high-concentration environment for several minutes. Far too long. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The cause listed as acute toxic inhalation. Both workers gave their accounts to authorities. The closure of the corridor, the warnings they had given her, and her refusal to comply. Investigators confirmed the mechanism. Solvent vapors had built up overnight in the enclosed corridor because of inadequate ventilation, creating a toxic atmosphere that was invisible and odorless enough to feel like nothing at all. That is the cruel part of this hazard, and the reason the warning existed. There is no dramatic sign of danger in a fume-filled corridor. It does not look flooded. It does not look like a crumbling cliff. It looks like an ordinary hallway someone has annoyingly decided to close. Every visible cue tells you it is fine. Only the people who set up the closure knew otherwise, and the entire purpose of restricting it was to keep someone from walking into air they could not survive. She asserted that no one had the authority to stop her, and stepped directly into the one hazard the closure existed to keep her away from. The barrier was not about control. It was the only thing standing between an ordinary corridor and a fatal one, and she pushed past it in the space of a sentence. This account, drawn from a compiled narrative, describes two women on a boat tour in tropical coastal waters. Their real names were not documented, so we will keep to what the source establishes and tell it as reported. The two of them had planned the kind of day a lot of people plan on holiday. A boat excursion, sun, the water, and photographs. Glamorous shots to remember the trip by. Their focus was on how the day would look afterward. The tan, the images, the feeling of an effortless, beautiful afternoon at sea. Before the boat departed, the crew did what crews are supposed to do. They offered life jackets to every passenger and made clear the vests were standard safety gear, particularly for anyone sitting near the edges or moving around the deck. This is the most routine moment of any boat tour. The orange vests come out, and most people put them on without a second thought. According to the account, these two women refused. The reason given was appearance. They did not want bright orange vests ruining their tan lines or spoiling the photographs they had planned. So they declined, and the boat set out with two passengers aboard who had no flotation, while the others around them did. For a while it was just a boat trip, but conditions on open water can change, and the sea grew rougher. The waves picked up, and at some point during the excursion, both women ended up in the water, swept or fallen overboard as the boat met the choppier seas. This is where the difference made by a simple vest becomes everything. The other passengers had flotation. These two did not. Weighed down by their clothes and with nothing to keep them at the surface, they struggled in the swell and eventually went under. The crew and the other passengers tried to reach them and alerted maritime rescue services. Search operations were launched, but the sea is vast and unforgiving, and the women were not recovered in time. their bodies washed ashore days later. Officials determined the cause of death was drowning. The detail the account preserves is the blunt assessment of a local police commissioner, who reportedly said that vanity was the primary cause of death, that prioritizing appearance over wearing the safety gear was, in the end, what cost them their lives. Investigators noted the obvious. The life jackets had been provided and recommended, and in those sea conditions, anyone without flotation faced a far higher risk than anyone with it. We should be careful here, because this case rests on a single narrative, and we cannot verify the names or the exact location. But the lesson at its center is as solid as any in this video. A life jacket is uncomfortable, unflattering, and almost always unnecessary, right up until the one moment it is the only thing keeping you alive. The vests they refused were the difference between the passengers who came home and the two who did not. This case unfolds at a recreational motorsports facility, the kind of place built around the thrill of a fast ride on a course. The woman at the center of it was not named in the source, and the date was not specified, so we will tell it within those limits. She had come for the experience, the speed, the run, the simple pleasure of a motorized ride on a track designed for exactly that. It is an entirely understandable thing to want. People go to these places to feel a controlled rush, to do something a little daring in a setting that is supposed to be managed and safe. At the staging area, that management showed up in a very ordinary form. Staff handed out helmets and explained that helmet use was mandatory, a requirement under the facility's safety rules and insurance policy. An instructor, identified in the narrative as Tyler, offered her a helmet directly. She refused it. According to the account, she dismissed the requirement and left the helmet sitting on the bench. Then she went out onto the course without head protection. We do not have a detailed reconstruction of the run itself, only its result. At some point she lost control of the vehicle or met a hazard on the course, and the result was a serious crash in which she struck her head violently. The impact caused a severe subdural hematoma, bleeding between the brain and the skull, along with other trauma. She was taken by ambulance from the facility to a regional medical center. The medical team treated her, but the brain injury was too severe. She died the following morning from its complications. When investigators looked into the death, two facts sat side by side. Helmet use had been mandatory at the facility, and the helmet assigned to her was still on the bench, unused, exactly where she had left it when they arrived. Medical staff established that she had died from a severe subdural hematoma caused by head trauma in the crash, precisely the kind of injury that a helmet is designed to reduce or prevent. That is the quiet weight of this one. There was no shortage of safety equipment. There was no failure of the facility to provide it. The single object that could have changed the outcome had been placed in her hands and then set down. It remained within arm's reach of the staging area the entire time she was being driven to the hospital. A helmet feels like a formality until the moment your head meets the ground. The rule was not bureaucracy, and the offer was not a hassle. They were the facility's attempt to stand between a hard impact and a fatal brain injury, and the equipment to do exactly that was sitting on a bench while she fought for her life and lost. The next story is one that plays out, in some form, in homes everywhere. The woman in this account was not named, and the location is given only as a private home, likely in North America, so we hold to what the source supports. She was a homeowner with an electrical problem, a fixture that needed fixing, the kind of small domestic fault that turns up in every house eventually, and she faced the choice that anyone with that problem faces: call someone who is trained or handle it yourself. She was advised to call a licensed electrician, specifically because of the risk that comes with high-voltage work, but hiring a professional costs money and means waiting, and there is an enormous amount of online content that makes electrical repair look quick and approachable. She watched DIY videos and decided she could manage the job on her own. The problem with electrical work is that the margin for error is unforgiving, and the rules that govern it are not optional. According to the account, she ignored the safety basics that separate a routine repair from a fatal one. She did not properly shut off the power at the breaker. She misidentified the live wires, and she worked on the circuit while it was still energized. While she was handling the wiring, she made direct contact with a live conductor, and her body completed the circuit. The shock that followed was severe enough to send her into immediate cardiac arrest. Family members or neighbors called for help, and paramedics attempted CPR and defibrillation, but they could not revive her. She was pronounced dead, the cause cardiac arrest due to electrocution. Inspectors later determined what had gone wrong. The circuit she had been working on had never been de-energized at the main breaker, and she had bypassed the most basic electrical safety procedure there is. The death was classified as accidental electrocution during unauthorized electrical work, and it was cited afterward as exactly the reason unqualified homeowners are warned away from complex electrical repairs. As the narration of the case put it, she was a homeowner who dismissed a trained electrician and attempted the repair after watching a video online, unaware of how quickly it would all go wrong. That phrase, "how quickly," is the whole story. Electricity gives no warning and no second attempt. A licensed electrician's entire job is built around the one habit she skipped, confirming the power is off before touching anything. The advice she declined was not about money or pride. It was the single safeguard that stands between a small household repair and an instant, unrecoverable mistake. Cheryl Mason was 47 years old, visiting an animal enclosure at what was described as a zoo or wildlife park. The exact location and date were not recorded in the source, but her name and the findings of the investigation were. She had come to see the animals up close, which is what these places are for. But there is a difference between viewing an animal and reaching toward one, and that difference is exactly what the barriers and the signs at an enclosure exist to enforce. The exhibit had clear instructions posted: "Do not feed the animal, do not reach through the fence." There were designated safer points from which to watch. Cheryl wanted more than the safe distance allowed. According to the account, she went looking for a way to get closer, and she found one. A corner of the enclosure where a seam in the fence left a slightly wider gap than the rest. It was the kind of small opening that should never matter, because the rule is simply not to put any part of yourself through the barrier at all. She pushed her hand and arm through that gap, reaching in to feed or pet the animal on the other side. The animal reacted, and it reacted with a speed and force that no person can match. It grabbed and pulled her arm, yanking her hard against the fence and striking her. She suffered severe trauma, including damage to the blood vessels and tissue of her arm and upper body. Staff and emergency services responded quickly, and she was rushed to hospital. But the damage was too extensive. The injuries to blood vessels and surrounding tissue could not be repaired in time, and she died of her injuries at the hospital. Investigators went over the scene and confirmed the details that mattered. The warning signs about not feeding the animals and not reaching through the fence were visible and in place, and Cheryl had deliberately sought out the wider gap at the corner seam and pushed her hand through, in direct violation of the posted rules. Her death was attributed to the trauma she suffered while doing so. As the investigation summary recorded, the feeding signs had been clearly posted and visible, and she had gone to the wider gap at the corner and pushed her hand through against those rules. The irony here is one of the oldest in any zoo. The fence is not there to keep the animal in alone. It is there to keep visitors out of reach, because the same creature that looks calm and approachable from a safe distance can injure or kill in a single motion. The rule was 4 simple words: do not reach through. It existed for precisely the outcome that followed. A wider gap in the fence is not an invitation. It is the one spot where the only protection left is the visitor's own willingness to keep their hands on their own side of the barrier. On February 19, 2025, a Sri Lanka Railways train pulled out of the hill country, climbing slowly through the tea estates between Ella and Nanu Oya. On board was Olga Permanova, a Russian tourist in her mid-30s, traveling with a friend. This stretch of railway is one of the most photographed in the world. Tourists come from everywhere to ride it, drawn by green slopes that fall away on both sides and by the famous open doorways of the old carriages, where the wind rushes in and the whole valley seems to roll past at arm's length. Olga had come for exactly that. The pictures from this line fill travel feeds. A figure leaning out from the footboard, one hand on the rail, the landscape blurring behind them. It looks free. It looks like the whole point of being somewhere far from home. And so, with the train moving, she stepped down onto the footboard, the metal steps just outside the carriage, to pose for a photo. What she could not see was how close the trackside comes on that route. The line cuts through cuttings and past poles, rocks, and structures that sit only inches from a passing carriage. According to police, as she leaned out, she struck a pole or a rock beside the track. The impact knocked her off balance, and she fell from the moving train. Other passengers saw it happen and raised the alarm. The train was stopped, and staff found her seriously injured beside the rails. She was rushed first to the hospital at Nanuoya, then transferred to a better-equipped facility in Nuwara Eliya. She died from her injuries shortly after she was admitted. Police opened an inquiry. They found no mechanical fault and no foul play. A local officer told the media plainly that she had lost balance and fell off the train while attempting to take pictures. It was, in the dry language of an investigation, an accident with a single cause. Here is the part that lingers. This is not a rare event on that line. Railway officials and local guides have warned, again and again, that passengers must not lean out of moving trains, precisely because the trackside is so close that a person hanging from the doorway can be hit by something they never see coming. The danger that makes the photos look so striking is the same danger the warnings are about. The line is marketed for the very image that keeps costing lives. Olga Permanova came to ride one of the most beautiful railways on Earth, and for a few seconds she was doing what almost everyone on that train wanted to do. The carriage she fell from kept its open door. The view she was reaching for is still there, still drawing people to lean a little further out. If you're already thinking how easily this could happen to anyone, you're not alone. Subscribe and stay with me through the rest. On the 3rd of September, 2024, a British man in his 50s stood on the south rim of the Grand Canyon in Arizona, one of the most visited natural wonders in the United States. He was there as a tourist, on holiday, doing what millions do every year, standing at a viewpoint, looking out over a gorge so vast it seems unreal, and reaching for his camera. The Grand Canyon does something strange to a person's sense of scale. The far wall can look close enough to touch. The drop below the rim doesn't register as a drop so much as a painting. And at the developed viewpoints, the National Park Service has built low stone walls, set back from the true edge, with signs telling visitors exactly why they're there. According to park officials, the man climbed over one of those low walls to pose for a photo nearer the rim. Witnesses said he moved out onto a rock outcrop beyond the barrier, onto the kind of ground the wall is built to keep people off. Then, near the edge, he lost his footing. He fell roughly 30 to 40 meters, somewhere between 100 and 130 feet into the canyon. Emergency services were called at once. Park rangers and a helicopter team were sent to find him. They reached the area below the rim and located his body, and he was pronounced dead at the scene. The viewpoint was closed while the recovery operation went on. Other visitors held back from the same edge. Investigators with the National Park Service found no signs of foul play. The fall appeared entirely accidental, and it had happened outside the designated viewing area, beyond a protective wall meant to keep people back from unstable ground. A park spokesperson put the lesson in the simplest possible terms afterward, telling the media that people need to stay behind railings and remain on designated trails and walkways. That sentence is almost the whole story. Falls are among the leading causes of death at the Grand Canyon. The park doesn't keep that quiet. It warns about it openly, on signs, in brochures, at the viewpoints themselves. The barriers are not decoration. They mark the line between solid ground and rock that may crumble, between a photograph and a fall no one walks away from. What makes this one hard is how small the trespass feels in the moment. A low wall, a few steps, a better angle on a view that takes your breath away. The man wasn't doing anything dramatic by his own reckoning. He was doing what felt like a tiny, harmless adjustment to get the picture everyone wants. The canyon does not scale its consequences to the size of the choice. He came to see one of the great sights of the world, and he very nearly did everything right. The wall was right there. He stepped past it for a moment, and the moment was all it took. This next case is told without a name, recorded only as a pattern that wildlife officers know far too well. A tourist, hiking and sightseeing in a national park in North America, saw a bear cub near a trail, and like so many before them, they reached for a phone and moved closer. It is hard to overstate how powerful that pull is. A bear cub is small, clumsy, almost comically appealing. Every instinct says approach. Every sign in bear country says the opposite. Parks where bears live post the warning plainly, in brochures and on boards at the trailheads. Never approach wildlife, and above all, never approach a cub, because the mother is almost always close, and she will defend her young without hesitation. The tourist, focused on the cub, with the phone extended for a close-up, did not notice the mother bear in the nearby woods. That is the heart of it. The whole attention was on the small animal in the frame, on getting near enough for the shot, and the larger danger stood unseen just beyond it. When the mother perceived a stranger approaching her cub, she charged. The attack was described as swift and brutal, and there was no time to undo the distance that had been closed. Emergency responders were called, but the injuries were too severe, and the tourist was pronounced dead. Wildlife officers later tracked the bear. Officials determined that the attack followed the classic and well-understood pattern of a defensive mother protecting her cub. Not a predatory animal, not a rogue, but a parent reacting exactly as her nature demands. And they concluded that the victim had ignored the signage and the guidance posted throughout such parks about keeping distance from wildlife. The irony here is quiet and painful. The single rule those signs press hardest, do not approach the cubs, is the exact rule that was broken. Not a swimming rule, not a fence, but the one specific warning written for this precise scenario, because rangers have watched it play out so many times before. What gets lost in the retelling is that this was not a malicious act. It was affection, almost. The desire to get close to something small and wild, and to hold on to the memory of it. The cub was never the threat. The threat was the relationship the cub had with the animal watching from the trees, and that relationship is the whole reason the warnings exist. Somewhere in that park, the signs still stand at the trailheads, saying the same thing they said that day. They are not there to spoil anyone's walk. They are there because the distance they ask for is the only thing standing between a beautiful sighting and a death that follows the same script every time. Hang Li Hong was 31 years old, a tourist from China, and she had come to one of Indonesia's most spectacular sights, the Ijen volcano in East Java, famous for its blue fire and for the way the dawn light fills the crater. She was traveling with her husband, Jiang Yong, and they had done the sensible thing. They had joined a guided group for the hike to the crater rim before sunrise, with a licensed guide whose job was to keep them safe. The guide did that job. According to reports, he gave the group explicit instructions. Stay in the designated safe area, away from the crumbling edge of the crater. Ijen's rim is known to be unstable, the ground at the lip prone to collapse, and a guide's most important role there is simply to hold tourists back from it. But Ijen is also heavily marketed for dramatic photographs, and near the edge stood a dead tree, stark and striking against the smoking crater, exactly the kind of frame that makes a picture unforgettable. Hang wanted that shot. She walked toward the tree, out toward the edge, and the guide pleaded with her to come back to the safe zone. She did not. She posed for several photos near the rim. Then, while backing up to set up another shot, her long skirt caught on something. She tripped, lost her balance, and fell roughly 75 meters, around 245 feet, into the crater. A rescue team had to descend into the volcano to reach her, a recovery that took about 2 hours. The injuries were consistent with a high fall, and she could not be saved. Local authorities ruled the death an accident, with no evidence of foul play. They established that she had left the safe area against her guide's instructions and fallen from unstable ground at the rim. Guides and park officials repeated, afterward, what the guide had said before. The crater edges are fragile and subject to collapse, and the safe zone exists for exactly that reason. The detail that stays with you is the guide himself. Hang had every protection a careful traveler could ask for. She had paid for expertise, joined a group, and brought along the one person whose entire purpose was to keep her from the edge. He warned her in words, in the moment, as she walked toward the tree. The system worked right up until the instant she stepped beyond it. It is easy to forget how ordinary the impulse was. A once-in-a-lifetime trip, a sunrise over a volcano, and a single perfect frame waiting at the edge. The guide's voice was the warning. The unstable rim was the danger. Between them was a few feet of ground that looked solid enough, and a skirt that caught at the wrong moment. This story, too, comes to us without a name. A male tourist, on holiday at a beach known for strong currents, somewhere along a European or Mediterranean coast. The details are sparse, but the shape of it is one that lifeguards everywhere would recognize in an instant. The conditions that day were dangerous, and the authorities had said so. Signs were posted warning against swimming, flagging the currents and the waves. This is the most basic form of protection a coastline offers, a clear, physical notice that the water on a given day is not safe to enter. Lifeguards close stretches of beach for precisely these conditions, and the closure is not a suggestion. The tourist went into the sea anyway, past the warnings, into water that had already been marked as hazardous, and the sea did what the signs predicted. He was caught almost at once in a powerful current and dragged away from the shore, pulled out faster than anyone can swim against. Rescue services were alerted, and lifeguards or emergency responders managed to reach him and pull him from the water. But by the time they brought him to the sand, he was unconscious. They worked on him for a long time, resuscitation efforts carried out there on the beach in front of everyone. Despite all of it, he was pronounced dead where he lay. Officials attributed the death to drowning caused by strong currents in an area that had been clearly marked as dangerous. And they made a point that holiday towns make every single year. Warnings had been ignored, and similar drownings happen annually when visitors underestimate local sea conditions. That last phrase carries the weight of the whole case. Underestimate. The sea on a warm day, in a place built for tourists, does not look like a killer. The waves can seem playful, the water inviting, the danger abstract a sign on a pole rather than a force that can take a strong swimmer in seconds. Locals know which currents to fear. A visitor arriving for a week often does not, and a closed beach can feel like an overcautious inconvenience rather than a verdict on the water. He had to pass the warnings to get into the sea. They were the line, and the line existed because people who knew that coast understood what the current could do. He went past it for a swim, the most ordinary holiday act there is, and the water did not give him back the way it took him. In February 2025, in the Valparai area near the Annamalai Tiger Reserve in Tamil Nadu, India, the traffic on a forest road had come to a stop. A wild elephant was near the roadway, and the drivers waiting there did what experience teaches in that part of the world. They kept their distance and held back, their stopped vehicles forming an informal barrier between the people and the animal. Among the travelers that evening was a 77-year-old German tourist, recorded in the source as Michael Gerson of Schultz, riding solo on a motorcycle through the wildlife-rich reserve. He had come for the kind of trip many dream of late in life. An open road through a beautiful, untamed landscape, the chance to see wild animals in their own country. And there, ahead, was a wild elephant. The waiting cars were not moving toward it, but the man wanted a close-up photograph, and so he maneuvered his motorcycle past the line of stopped vehicles toward the animal, closing the distance that everyone else had carefully kept. A wild elephant is one of the most powerful land animals on Earth, and at close range it is unpredictable and immensely dangerous. As he drew near in pursuit of the shot, the elephant became agitated. It charged. It gored him with its tusks, and then trampled him. Bystanders and authorities rushed him to a nearby hospital, but the injuries were catastrophic, and he died despite medical treatment. Forest and police officials concluded that he had ignored both the implicit and explicit warnings that stopped traffic and the standard guidance about elephant encounters by approaching a wild elephant on a motorcycle. The cause of death was trauma from goring and trampling. Officials repeated, as they so often must, that wild elephants are unpredictable and extremely dangerous at close range. The irony is built right into the scene. Forest departments across India warn people never to approach wild elephants and to stay in their vehicles at a safe distance. That evening, the warning didn't need a sign. It was sitting in the road in the form of every other driver, stopped and waiting. The line of cars was the message. Stay back, do not proceed. He rode around it. There is something especially quiet about a 77-year-old man, alone on a motorcycle, far from home, who simply wanted a good picture of an elephant. It was not bravado so much as the same wish that brings everyone to a reserve like that to get close to something wild and remember it. The other drivers had read the animal correctly. He read it as a photograph waiting to be taken, and the gap between those two readings was the whole of it. Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, on the Big Island, is a landscape that looks like the earth still being made steam rising from vents, hardened lava stretching to the horizon, ground that can be hollow beneath a thin shell of rock. It draws visitors from all over the world, but the man at the center of this case was not a foreign tourist. He was a 33-year-old Hawaii resident, someone who lived on the island and knew it. That detail matters, because it dismantles the easy assumption that these tragedies only happen to outsiders who don't know any better. The park issues frequent, highly visible warnings. Stay on marked trails, stay out of closed areas, because the dangers there are not always the ones you can see. Thin crust over open space, toxic volcanic gases, sudden collapses. The closures exist because the hazards are hidden. The man entered a restricted area that park officials had closed because of those volcanic hazards. He went beyond the warning signs and the barriers, into a section the park had deliberately sealed off. At some point inside that zone, something went fatally wrong, a fall, or fumes, or the ground itself. The compilation that records the case does not spell out the exact mechanism, only the outcome. His body was later found by park rangers, who had to carry out a recovery operation in the dangerous area. He was pronounced dead. National Park Service investigators concluded that he had entered an explicitly restricted and hazardous part of the park, and they linked the death directly to the decision to bypass closures designed to protect visitors from exactly the kind of danger that took him. The closure is the irony here. It was not vague. It was a specific official line drawn around a piece of ground because the park knew what could happen there, and it was crossed by someone who lived on that island, who had presumably driven past those warnings before, who may have believed that familiarity was a kind of safety. It is not. The volcanic terrain doesn't recognize residency. The crust is no thinner for a stranger than for a local. The gas is no less toxic to someone who grew up nearby. The thing the park keeps trying to say, in sign after sign, is that the danger lives in the ground itself, and the only protection is the open, marked trail. He stepped off it into a place the park had already declared off limits, and the ground there kept the warning it had always carried. On the night of the 26th of March, 2022, a young woman named Karina Castillo was driving north on 43rd Avenue in Phoenix, Arizona. She was 21 years old. In the back of her Nissan Altima was her 1-year-old son, Ethan, a little boy everyone called EJ, and her stepbrother rode along with them. It was a little after 9:30 in the evening, the kind of warm late March night where the streets are quiet and the lights cycle from green to red over empty lanes. Karina had a green light. She had the right of way. There was no reason to think the intersection ahead held anything dangerous at all. Coming the other direction, westbound on Thunderbird Road, was a Hyundai Tucson driven by Brittany McClure, 33. Witnesses who saw her in the moments before said she had been driving aggressively, weaving and pushing her speed well past what the road allowed. As she reached the intersection of 43rd Avenue and Thunderbird, her signal was red. The cross traffic was moving on green. She did not slow down. Surveillance video captured what happened next. McClure's SUV entered the intersection at high speed against the red light and struck Karina's Altima broadside, directly on the driver's side. The force was enormous. Both vehicles were torn apart and spun across the asphalt, scattering debris under the streetlights. Karina Castillo and Brittany McClure both suffered catastrophic injuries and were pronounced dead a short time afterward. Karina's stepbrother survived, badly hurt. Little EJ, just 1 year old, was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. He died days later. A young mother, her baby son, and the driver who hit them. 3 lives gone from a single instant at a single intersection. Investigators went to work on the timeline. Phoenix police said McClure had run the red light at, in their words, a very high rate of speed. The signal timing records and the video confirmed beyond doubt that the Altima had the green and the right of way. Toxicology reportedly found both alcohol and drugs in McClure's system, and police described impairment and speed as the major factors. No charges were filed against anyone else. The collision was attributed entirely to McClure's actions. What makes this one so hard is how avoidable it was. The intersection had ordinary, working red light signals. Phoenix had run public campaigns for years warning about the city's high rate of red light crashes. The danger wasn't hidden. It was practically advertised on the roads she drove every day. Sergeant Philip Krinsky of the Phoenix Police put it plainly. He said McClure disregarded the red light at a high rate of speed and struck the vehicle, and that this was absolutely preventable. 3 people set out on an ordinary errand on an ordinary night. 1 green light, 1 red, and a chain of choices that turned a quiet intersection into the worst kind of place. Karina Castillo was 21. Her son was 1. If you want more of these told the same careful way, do subscribe. Every one of them began as a perfectly normal plan. Mara Rodriguez was 26 years old, and on the evening of the 6th of August, 2020, she had an audience. She was driving near North Academy Boulevard in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and she had opened up Facebook Live to broadcast herself behind the wheel. The plan, as far as anyone could tell from the footage and the witnesses, was simple: to show off. To show how fast her car could go, to weave through traffic, to give the people watching something to react to in real time. For a few minutes, that's exactly what she did. She talked to her viewers as she drove, reportedly boasting about her speed. She moved between lanes. Police would later piece together, from witness accounts and the video itself, that she was street racing another vehicle and running red lights as she went. The camera was rolling the whole time, capturing a young woman who believed she was completely in control. She wasn't. At high speed, Mara lost control of the car. It crossed into oncoming traffic and struck another vehicle head-on. The live stream ended seconds before the impact. The recording simply stopped, mid-broadcast, with the crash just out of frame. Mara Rodriguez suffered fatal injuries and died at the scene. The driver of the car she hit was seriously hurt but survived and was taken to the hospital. Her phone was recovered from the wreckage, and investigators confirmed that the video had cut off only a few seconds before she ran out of road. The Colorado Springs Police Department's investigation was direct. They concluded that excessive speed, illegal racing, and the distraction of live streaming were the primary causes. There were no mechanical defects in her car, and no problems with the roadway. Nothing to point to except her own driving. Prosecutors did not pursue charges against the other driver, because the evidence showed clearly that it was Mara's vehicle that had started the dangerous behavior. A department spokesperson said the crash was completely preventable and tied it directly to her choice to race and record herself. Colorado has explicit laws against street racing and against using a mobile device while driving, and local police had publicized their enforcement of both. The cruel irony, the one that ran through all the coverage, is the camera itself. Mara had turned it on to capture a moment she wanted other people to see, a moment of speed and bravado. Instead, the last thing it recorded was the few seconds before the end of her life. There's something uniquely modern about a tragedy that plays out for an audience that can't do anything to stop it. Somewhere, people were watching a young woman drive, and then the screen went dark, and only later did they understand what they'd just seen. Mara Rodriguez was 26. The drive was supposed to be a performance. It became the last thing she ever did. On the 24th of June, 2021, Samantha Lopez was driving home from work. She was 35 years old, traveling along South Rainbow Boulevard in Las Vegas, Nevada, near West Patrick Lane. By the accounts of the people who shared the road with her that day, something had set her off. Witnesses told police she seemed angry at other drivers, tailgating, leaning on the horn, riding bumpers far too close. The flashpoint, captured partly on dashcam and partly in witness statements, was a pickup truck. Samantha cut in front of it. Then she slammed on her brakes, repeatedly, the kind of brake checking meant to scare or punish the driver behind. Not satisfied with that, she pulled alongside the pickup to gesture and shout. The whole confrontation was building toward an intersection. And there, with anger fully in the driver's seat, she made the decision that ended everything. As the vehicles neared the intersection, Samantha suddenly attempted an illegal U-turn, swinging across multiple lanes of oncoming traffic, apparently trying to block the pickup, to cut it off, to win. But she turned directly into the path of a southbound sedan that had the green light and the right-of-way. The sedan, moving at speed, slammed into the side of her SUV. Her vehicle rolled and came to rest on its side in the roadway. Rescuers extricated Samantha, but she was pronounced dead a short time later at a nearby hospital. The occupants of the sedan she'd turned in front of suffered moderate injuries and survived. The pickup driver, the one her anger had been aimed at, was completely unhurt. He stayed at the scene and cooperated with investigators. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police reported that Samantha's unsafe turn, her improper lane change, and her failure to yield were the sole causes of the collision. There was no evidence of impairment in any driver. The road was fine. The vehicles were fine. The weather was fine. Based on the witness accounts and the recorded aggressive maneuvers, it was classified as a road rage-related crash. Nevada law forbids U-turns across live lanes at a controlled intersection, and the signs and markings making that clear were all in place. A traffic officer summed it up for local media. "The collision occurred," he said, "because one driver let anger override judgment and made an illegal turn directly into traffic." Police later used the case in their outreach, with a simple message: trying to teach another driver a lesson can cost you your own life. What stays with you is the geometry of it. She was trying to get in front of a pickup truck. That was the whole goal, the thing worth a U-turn across oncoming lanes. The pickup driver went home that night. Samantha Lopez did not. The morning of the 5th of February, 2019, was an ordinary school morning along State Route 39, a rural two-lane highway near Georgetown in Quitman County, Georgia. Candace Hardy, 31, was driving to work, heading north. Somewhere ahead of her, in the southbound lane, a school bus had pulled to its regular stop to pick up children for the day. The bus was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. Its red lights were flashing, Its stop arm was extended. On an undivided highway like that one, Georgia law is unambiguous. Every vehicle, in both directions, must come to a stop. The cars around Candace were slowing for it, the way the law and ordinary sense require. Candace, though, was behind a vehicle that had slowed, and she decided to pass it. She pulled out of her lane and into the oncoming southbound lane to get around the car ahead of her. It was a no-passing zone, and as she committed to the maneuver and the lane opened up in front of her, she realized too late what was actually there. Not just slow traffic, but a stopped school bus directly in her path. She tried to swerve back. There was no time. Her Jeep Cherokee struck the front of the bus head-on. Candace Hardy suffered fatal injuries and was pronounced dead at the scene. The bus driver and the roughly dozen students aboard were evaluated by responders. Some reported minor complaints, but no one on the bus was seriously hurt. Parents and emergency crews converged on the rural highway, and the road was closed for hours. The Georgia State Patrol's investigation found that Candace had illegally entered the oncoming lane in a no-passing zone and had failed to heed the stopped school bus's signals. There was no sign of mechanical failure and no indication of impairment. It was driver error, plainly, and a violation of the state's school bus passing laws. A state patrol spokesperson said it directly. Had she simply stayed in her lane and obeyed the stopped school bus, this crash would not have happened. Troopers called it completely avoidable and used it in regional safety campaigns, with the warning that impatience around school buses can be deadly for the impatient driver, too. The flashing red lights of a school bus are one of the most recognizable signals on any road. We learn them as children, from inside the bus. They existed that morning, working exactly as designed. The detail that lingers is that the people the law was written to protect, the children on that bus, all walked away. The only person who died was the one who tried to get around it. The next one is harder to sit with, because the danger announced itself the entire way. On the afternoon of the 13th of April, 2018, Jessica Allen was driving a group of friends toward a shopping center near Lakeland in Polk County, Florida. She was 24. According to the friends who survived, they were running late, that ordinary low-stakes pressure of being behind schedule that everyone has felt. Their route took them toward a CSX railroad crossing on US 92. As Jessica approached the crossing, it began doing everything it was built to do to keep her safe. The warning lights flashed. The bells rang. The crossing arm started to lower across the road as a freight train approached. The vehicles around her began to stop, the way you're supposed to. Jessica didn't stop. Witnesses told deputies that she swerved around the cars that were slowing, accelerated, and drove around the lowered gate, an attempt, it seemed, to beat the train across. Her Honda Civic went onto the tracks. The locomotive struck it on the passenger side at significant speed. Jessica Allen suffered fatal injuries and was pronounced dead at the scene. The two passengers in her car were seriously injured but survived. The train crew was unharmed, though there was nothing they could have done. Debris scattered down the tracks, and train traffic was halted for hours. The Polk County Sheriff's Office concluded that Jessica had deliberately gone around the crossing arm in violation of multiple posted warnings and state law. The train's horn, its lights, and its onboard data recorder all confirmed that every signal had been working properly and that the crew had no opportunity to stop in time. There was no impairment reported. The crash was attributed entirely to the decision to go around the gate. Florida law explicitly prohibits driving around lowered railroad gates, and this crossing had clear signage and active warning systems. Sheriff Grady Judd spoke about it bluntly afterward. She chose to go around a clearly lowered gate, he told reporters, and she paid with her life. He described the crash as an example of impatience and poor judgment with tragic consequences, noting that the person who broke the rules was the only one killed. A railroad gate is one of the few warnings on the road that is also a physical barrier. It comes down, it makes noise, it flashes, It is designed to be impossible to ignore. The thing being protected against, a moving freight train, cannot swerve and cannot stop quickly. Jessica Allen was 24 years old and a few minutes behind schedule. The gate was already down. Around 2 in the morning on the 9th of May, 2016, Laura Ann Perez was making her way home from a night out. She was 29 years old, driving along Interstate 35 near New Braunfels, Texas. Investigators would later establish that she had been drinking. But the immediate problem, the one that drew a wave of frightened phone calls, was the direction she was traveling. Laura had entered the interstate by driving up an off-ramp. That put her southbound in the northbound lanes, facing the wrong way against highway traffic in the dark. To do it, she had to pass multiple "Do Not Enter" and "Wrong Way" signs, reflective and standing exactly where they were meant to be. The 911 calls started coming in fast. Drivers reported a car going the wrong way on the interstate. At least one caller described trying to warn her, saying the driver kept going even as people flashed their lights and honked. Other motorists could see the danger plainly and were doing everything they could to signal it to her. For several miles, Laura kept driving. Then her vehicle collided head-on with a northbound car traveling at full highway speed. Laura Ann Perez died at the scene from blunt force injuries. The driver of the other car was seriously injured but survived. The interstate was shut down for an extended crash investigation. The Texas Department of Public Safety found that Laura's blood alcohol concentration was above the legal limit. They verified that the entry ramp and the signage were correct, and that the off-ramp she had used was marked with multiple wrong-way warnings. The DPS concluded that intoxication and disregard of that signage led directly to the wrong-way entry and the collision that followed. A DPS official summarized it grimly. Every sign she passed told her she was headed the wrong way, but alcohol and poor choices overpowered common sense. What separates this case from a simple drunk driving tragedy is the warnings, both the painted ones and the human ones. The signs were there, and beyond the signs, real people in real cars were flashing their headlights into the darkness, honking, trying across a few terrifying seconds to break through to a stranger and tell her she was going the wrong way. She passed all of it. The only person killed in the crash was the one who'd been warned, again and again, that she shouldn't be there. During the evening rush hour on the 3rd of March 2017, a 43-year-old woman was driving an SUV onto the Garden State Parkway near Woodbridge, New Jersey. Her name was not released publicly. She was entering the parkway by an on-ramp, the everyday act of merging into moving traffic that drivers perform without a second thought. But on this evening, witnesses said, she seemed intent on something more specific, getting ahead of a tractor-trailer that was already in the through lane beside her. As the on-ramp lane began to run out, the SUV drew alongside the big truck. This is the moment merges ask a small question of every driver: speed up and slide in ahead, or ease off and fall in behind. Witnesses told state police that she refused to do either gracefully. She wouldn't slow down and she wouldn't fall behind. Instead, she edged closer to the front of the truck, honking and gesturing, determined not to end up stuck behind it. The lane was ending, and a decision had to be made. Rather than yield, she swerved toward the truck. Her SUV made contact with the side of the tractor-trailer and was pushed into the guardrail. The vehicle rotated, then rolled over, coming to rest upside down on its roof in the rush-hour traffic. The driver was trapped inside and was later pronounced dead. The truck driver stopped immediately and cooperated with authorities. He was uninjured. Traffic on the parkway was delayed for several hours. New Jersey State Police found that a failure to yield at the merge, along with an unsafe lane change by the SUV driver, were the main causes of the crash. The truck had been in its own lane, traveling at a steady speed, and no citations were issued to its driver. There was no impairment reported. Investigators called it a driver error collision rooted in impatience. New Jersey law is clear that merging vehicles must yield to through traffic and merge safely. A state police spokesperson described it as a classic case of a driver refusing to yield in a merge, with fatal results. The thing that makes this one quietly haunting is how small the stakes really were. A merge lasts a few seconds. The difference between going ahead of the truck and going behind it was, at most, a few car lengths and a few seconds of travel time. There was nothing to win, but in refusing to be stuck behind a tractor trailer, she forced an interaction that a fully loaded truck could never lose. She was 43 years old, on her evening commute, and the choice not to yield was the last one she made. On the afternoon of the 14th of November, 2020, a 27-year-old woman was driving a Toyota Camry on Highway 101 near San Jose, California. Her name was never released in public reporting, but her driving was captured in detail on the dash cam of another vehicle that happened to be sharing the freeway with her, and in the accounts of the motorists around her. What that footage showed was a driver at war with the road itself. The Camry drifted between lanes and abruptly slowed in front of other vehicles, brake-checking them, apparently furious at traffic that was trying to merge near her. She blocked lanes. She nearly caused several collisions before anything actually happened, forcing the cars around her to swerve and brake to avoid her. It was the behavior of someone trying to control and intimidate everyone else on the freeway at once. Then the pattern flipped. After all that slowing and blocking, she suddenly accelerated hard in the far left lane, weaving through cars at high speed. And at that speed, weaving, she clipped another vehicle while changing lanes. She lost control. The Camry spun across multiple lanes of the highway and was struck broadside by a pickup truck. The impact shoved her car into yet another vehicle, setting off a chain reaction crash across the freeway. The driver of the Camry was critically injured and later pronounced dead at the hospital. The occupants of the other vehicles she'd collided with were hurt to varying degrees, but they all survived. The California Highway Patrol shut down the freeway for the investigation and cleanup. Using the dashcam footage and the witness statements, the CHP concluded that unsafe lane changes, reckless driving, and excessive speed by the Camry's driver were the primary causes. There were no road defects, no weather problems, no signs of a medical emergency or a mechanical failure. The behavior was classified as intentional, aggressive driving. California's reckless driving statute and its basic speed law were both clearly violated. A CHP officer described what the video showed as a pattern of deliberate, aggressive moves that led directly to the crash. There's a grim symmetry to how it ended. For minutes, she had treated the freeway as something to dominate, slowing the cars she didn't like, blocking lanes, punishing drivers who tried to merge. She had tried to control everyone around her, and when the crash finally came, in a tangle of vehicles spread across the highway, hers was the only life lost. The people she'd spent that drive intimidating went home. She was 27. On the 14th of August, 2010, a 20-year-old woman named Kalita H. was driving along Country Road, 519 Inches, Kentucky. It was the kind of summer day made for the windows down and the roof open. Her Chevy had atop those removable roof panels that leave the cabin open to the sky above the driver and passenger. They were out, and the wind was rushing through the car as she moved along at highway speed. There was nothing remarkable about the drive itself. Two young people, a familiar stretch of road, the freedom of a warm afternoon, and then, somewhere along that road, she and her passenger decided to swap seats while the car was still moving. It is the sort of impulse that feels almost weightless in the moment. A dare, a laugh, a way to make an ordinary drive feel like something more. The car was still rolling. The roof was open above them, an inviting gap to the sky. Kalita stood up through the opening. To swap seats this way, she had to lift herself out of the driver's position and let her body rise into the wind above the moving car. At highway speed, that wind is not a breeze. It is a force, strong enough to knock a person off balance the moment they are no longer braced and seated. She climbed onto the roof, and then she lost her balance. She fell from the vehicle. There was no slowing it. No second chance once she was outside the car and in the air. She struck a guardrail at the side of the road, the very infrastructure built to keep cars from leaving the road safely. The impact was fatal. The Fayette County Coroner's Office later confirmed the cause. She died from the injuries sustained when she struck the guardrail. There was no mystery to investigate in the usual sense, no mechanical failure, no other vehicle. The sequence was simple and brutal. A person stood up out of a moving car. The wind and the motion did the rest, and a piece of roadside steel meant to save lives ended one. What stays with you about this case is how small the leap felt and how total the consequence was. A seat swap, something people joke about, something that in almost every other instance ends with nothing more than a story. The roof was open, the road was clear, the day was bright, and in the space of a few seconds, all of that ordinary freedom turned into the worst possible outcome. Kalita was 20 years old, with everything that age implies still ahead of her. The line between a harmless prank and a fatal fall turned out to be no wider than the edge of an open roof. If you're already thinking how easily a moment like that could happen to anyone, you're not alone. Subscribe and stay with me through the rest. In 1997, in Pittston, Pennsylvania, a man named Wayne Roth made a decision that most people, looking back, find almost impossible to understand. He reached into a tank that held a cobra belonging to a friend. The snake bit him. A cobra bite is not a wound you negotiate with. The venom works on the nervous system, and time is the single most important factor in surviving one. Hospitals carry anti-venom for exactly this reason. Every minute that passes without treatment is a minute the venom is given to do its work. Wayne, by every account in the reporting, would have known he had been bitten. There was no ambiguity about what had happened. And here is where the story turns. Wayne refused to go to the hospital. According to the retelling, when his friend Roger urged him to seek care, Wayne's answer was simple and final. "I don't need to go to hospital," he said. Instead of heading to an emergency room, he went to a pub. He drank heavily. He stayed among friends, in the warm and familiar setting of a bar, while inside his body the venom continued spreading unchecked. About an hour after the bite, Wayne Roth died. The available account frames his death as exactly what it appears to be a preventable consequence of declining urgent medical care. There was treatment available. There was a clear and immediate danger. And in between the two stood a personal choice to wave it all off and carry on with his evening as though nothing serious had happened. What makes this one land so heavily is the ordinariness of where he chose to go. Not somewhere reckless. A pub. A place people go to relax, to unwind, to feel safe among company. Wayne spent what turned out to be the last hour of his life in that comfort, dismissing the one thing that might have saved him. The bite itself was the dangerous moment, but it was not the fatal one. The fatal decision came afterward, calmly, over a drink, the decision to do nothing. There is a particular kind of tragedy and a death that a single car ride to a hospital would almost certainly have prevented. The venom was the weapon, but the hour he gave it was his own. Wayne Roth's name survives in these collections precisely because the gap between what he could have done and what he chose to do is so stark and so human. On the 15th of May, 2011, a 20-year-old man in Brisbane, Australia, wanted to take part in something the whole internet seemed to be doing that year. The craze was called planking. The idea was almost childishly simple. You lie face down, completely rigid like a wooden plank, in some unexpected or unlikely place, and someone photographs you. The more surprising the location, the better the picture. It spread across social media at the time as a kind of harmless, slightly silly game. The young man found his spot. It was a railing, high up the sort of narrow ledge that makes for a striking photo precisely because it looks daring. He climbed up and stretched himself out, face down, along the railing, holding the rigid pose the game demanded. For the photo to work, the location had to look impressive. This one was 7 stories above the ground. What separates a great planking photo from a fatal one is balance, and balance on a narrow railing, with your body held stiff and your weight unevenly distributed, is an extraordinarily fragile thing. He lost it. There was no recovering once his body began to shift. He fell 7 stories. The fall killed him. The reporting frames it plainly as a stunt-related fall, a young man trying to take part in a playful, fashionable trend, who misjudged a railing by the smallest margin. What gives this case its weight is how completely innocent the intention was. He was not trying to hurt anyone, not breaking into anywhere, not committing any act of malice. He was doing what countless others were doing that same week for a laugh and a photograph. The vast majority of those photos ended with nothing more than a shared image and a few comments. The difference between those and this one was the choice of a 7th-story railing instead of a park bench or a kitchen counter. That is the irony that sits at the center of it. A game designed to be funny and harmless became instantly, irreversibly fatal, not because of anything dramatic, but because of height and a moment's lost balance. The photo was meant to be the point. Instead, the climb up onto that railing was the last thing he ever did. He was 20 years old, caught up in a trend that, for almost everyone else, was nothing more than a passing joke. In July of 2011, a man from Onondaga, New York, joined a protest ride. The cause was one that genuinely matters to a lot of riders: motorcycle helmet laws. Across the United States, there has long been a heartfelt debate about whether the government should be able to require an adult to wear a helmet, or whether that choice belongs to the rider alone. People feel strongly about it, on both sides, and they organize rides to make their point. This man believed in that cause enough to put his own body behind it. The protest he took part in was a helmetless ride, riders deliberately going without helmets to demonstrate, visibly and publicly, their objection to laws that would require them. He climbed onto his motorcycle, bareheaded, and rode as a statement of principle. Whatever you think of the argument, there is something undeniably committed about a person willing to make it with their own conduct, out on a public road. During the ride, something went wrong with the bike or the road beneath it. He was thrown forward, flipping over the handlebars. With nothing protecting his head, he struck it directly. The injury was fatal. The available reporting does not include a full crash investigation, but it states the mechanism clearly. He went over the handlebars and suffered a fatal head injury. There was no helmet between his skull and the ground. The irony in this one is almost unbearable in its directness, and it is worth stating carefully, not as a verdict on the man, but as the simple fact the story turns on. He was protesting against the very thing that exists specifically to prevent the injury that killed him. A helmet is designed for exactly one purpose: to absorb the impact when a rider's head meets a hard surface. He had chosen, on principle, to ride without one, and the crash found the one vulnerability the law he opposed was written to address. He died believing in something. That belief, sincere as it was, placed him on a motorcycle without the single piece of equipment that might have changed the outcome. The cause he rode for and the manner of his death are bound together so tightly that the story almost tells itself. A man made a stand about helmets and was killed by a head injury, the kind of grim coincidence that no one could have scripted and that no one would have wished on him. On the 25th of August, 2010, in Daejeon, South Korea, a 40-year-old man who used a wheelchair was waiting for an elevator. We have all felt the small sting of watching the doors close just before we reach them, that flash of frustration when the thing you needed leaves without you. For most of us, it passes in a moment. We sigh. We press the button again. We wait. On this day, that frustration took hold of him and would not let go. The elevator had departed without him, and he was angry about it. What happened next unfolded in a sequence the reporting lays out plainly. He drove his wheelchair at the closed elevator doors. He rammed them. Once, then again, then a third time. Elevator doors are not built to be battering rams, but they are also not meant to give way under that kind of force. On the third impact, they failed. The doors that had closed in front of him opened onto nothing, not a waiting car, but the empty shaft, with the elevator itself somewhere on another floor. He plunged down into the open space. He died in the shaft. The available account points to a simple mechanical truth at the heart of it. The doors could not withstand the repeated force of the wheelchair being driven into them. They were a barrier, and barriers have limits. He found the limit of these ones in the worst possible way, and what lay behind them was a fatal drop. The irony is painful in its smallness. The thing that frustrated him was a missed elevator, an inconvenience, a delay of a minute or two. The response to that inconvenience opened directly onto the danger the doors existed to seal off. A closed elevator door is, among other things, a safety device. It stands between a person and an open shaft. By forcing it, he removed the only thing protecting him from the fall. There is no grand lesson dressed up in this one, only a stark and human chain of events. A moment of anger, 3 impacts, and a barrier that gave way at precisely the wrong place. A delay of seconds turned into a fall that ended a life. It is a reminder of how completely an ordinary irritation can spiral when it meets something built to hold a line. On a major freeway in Brazil known as the Via Dutra, a young couple pulled their car over. The Via Dutra is one of the country's busiest highways, a heavily trafficked artery carrying cargo trucks and cars at speed, day and night. The couple wanted privacy, and they stopped the car to be alone together. Every highway is built with this exact need in mind. Along the edge runs the shoulder, a strip of pavement set aside precisely so that a vehicle can stop out of the way of moving traffic. It is the safe place, the margin between the live lanes and the world beyond the road. Drivers are taught to use it for exactly the kind of unplanned stop the couple were making. But they did not stop on the shoulder. According to the account, they parked in the right-hand lane, a live lane, with traffic still flowing through it at full speed. From the inside of a stopped car, in a private moment, it may not have felt like the dangerous place it was. The difference between the shoulder and that lane is only a matter of a few feet of pavement. In consequence, it is the difference between everything and nothing. A cargo truck came down that lane. To the driver of a heavy truck moving at speed, a stationary car in a live traffic lane is one of the most dangerous things on the road. There is simply not enough distance to stop. The truck struck the car. Both occupants were killed. The reporting describes the crash as the direct consequence of stopping in a live lane rather than on the shoulder. There was nothing exotic about the cause, no mechanical failure, no freak weather, just a car at rest where moving traffic expected an open road. The irony here is quiet and devastating. Safety on a highway is built around one core idea, that the moving lanes stay clear and that stopping happens off to the side. The shoulder was right there, a few feet away, designed for precisely this. The couple's brief, private stop placed their car directly in the path of vehicles that had every reason to assume the lane ahead was empty. A moment meant to be intimate and hidden became, in an instant, a high-speed collision that neither of them survived. The margin they needed existed. It was simply a little to their right. In 1999, at a place called Scrinklehaven in Wales, a 27-year-old man stood at the top of a cliff. Scrinklehaven is a striking spot on the Welsh coast, the kind of dramatic shoreline where the rock falls away to the sea below. Nearby were some teenage boys, and the man, by the account that survives, wanted to impress them. The cliff was about 80 feet high. That is an enormous distance to fall into water far higher than the platforms used even in professional high diving, where every variable is controlled and the divers train for years. From 80 feet, the surface of the sea is not soft. Water entered at that speed behaves almost like a solid, and the way a body hits it makes the difference between a clean entry and a catastrophic one. He dove. It was meant to be a moment of bravado, a feat to win the admiration of the young onlookers, the sort of impulse that has probably existed for as long as people have had an audience to perform for. He launched himself off the edge and fell the full 80 feet into the water below. The impact knocked him unconscious. Whatever happened in those final feet, the angle, the position of his body, the water hit him hard enough to take away his senses entirely, and an unconscious person in the sea cannot save themselves. The teenagers he had been trying to impress became his rescuers. They went into the water and recovered him, pulling him out. But it was already too late. He was declared dead on arrival at the hospital. The account describes the dive as an apparent attempt to impress the boys watching. There is no deeper official finding in what survives, only the shape of it, a stunt for an audience that ended in immediate unconsciousness and death. The irony is that the very people he wanted to impress were the ones left trying to save him, and then left carrying the memory of it. He was 27. The dive was meant to be the impressive part, the thing they would talk about afterward. Instead, the height that made it impressive was the same height that made it fatal. 80 feet is a long way down, and water at the bottom of it is far less forgiving than it looks from the edge. In February of 1998, in Buenos Aires, Argentina, a 25-year-old man and his 20-year-old wife were in their apartment on the 8th floor. What should have been an ordinary evening at home had turned into a heated argument. Marital disputes happen in countless homes. Almost all of them stay inside the walls where they begin. This one did not. At the height of the conflict, the man threw his wife from the balcony. From 8 stories up, it was an act that by any measure should have been fatal. She went over the edge. But something extraordinary happened on the way down. The woman became tangled in power lines strung below the building. The lines caught her and arrested her, fall a thread of impossible luck in the middle of a horror. She was alive, suspended below the balcony she had just been thrown from. What the man did next is the part that turns this from one tragedy into something stranger. Seeing her below, he jumped after her. The account does not dwell on his reasons, and we should not invent them. What is recorded is the action. He went over the same balcony, but he missed the power lines that had saved his wife. There was nothing to catch him. He fell the full 8 stories to the ground and died. His wife, meanwhile, survived. From her tangled position among the lines, she managed to swing herself toward a nearby balcony and was rescued. The intended victim of the fall lived. The man who threw her and then followed was the one who died. The supplied account presents this as a fatal, impulsive act in the middle of domestic conflict, without a fuller official report. What it leaves behind is one of the most bitterly ironic outcomes imaginable. He acted to send her over the edge, and the edge took him instead. The power lines that should have meant her death became her salvation, and their absence directly beneath his own jump became his end. It is a case that resists easy summary because of how the roles inverted in a matter of seconds. A woman thrown from a great height walked away. The man fell and did not. The thinnest margin, a few feet of cable, present in one spot and absent in another, decided who lived and who died. 2 people went over the same balcony within moments of each other, and only the one never meant to fall came back from it. In the grasslands bordering Hwange National Park in Zimbabwe, there was a lion that researchers knew by name. Cecil was an adult male, large, dark-maned, and unmistakable. He wore a research collar, fitted by scientists who had been studying him for years. To the people who tracked his movements, he was not just a wild animal. He was data, a known life, a fixed point on a map that told a longer story about the lions of that region. On the 1st of July, 2015, Cecil was killed during a trophy hunt. According to the reporting that followed, he was drawn away from the protected land of the park, lured beyond the boundary line that existed precisely to keep wildlife like him safe. Once he crossed that invisible edge, the protections of the park no longer applied. What happened next was slow, and it is part of why the case provoked such fury around the world. Cecil was first struck with a bough. He was not killed outright. According to the accounts that emerged afterward, he was then tracked for hours before being finished with a firearm. A monitored, collared, named lion, one that scientists had spent years following, died over the course of a long and drawn-out pursuit just outside the park that had been his home. The immediate aftermath was unlike anything the conservation world had seen. Zimbabwean authorities and conservation groups condemned the killing. The story crossed from wildlife reporting into front-page news, and Cecil's name was suddenly known to millions of people who had never thought about lion hunting at all. His research collar, the very thing meant to study and protect him, became the detail that made his death impossible to ignore. The investigation and the public discussion that followed centered on the rules. Reporting and later industry debate focused on whether the proper permits had been in place, and above all on that one act at the heart of it, the alleged luring of the lion away from the park boundary. Had he been drawn off protected land deliberately? That question framed everything that came after, because it turned a hunt into a story about a line that was crossed. The irony sits in that boundary itself. A national park draws a line on the ground and says, "Inside this, the wild is protected." Cecil lived inside it. He was known, collared, and watched over. And he died because, according to the reporting, he was tempted across the one line that was holding the danger back. The system worked perfectly, right up until the moment something pulled him past its edge. Cecil's death did not change the wild he came from overnight, but his name became shorthand for a question the world had been avoiding, and for a boundary that meant nothing the moment he stepped beyond it. If you're already thinking how easily an ordinary plan can turn into something like this, you're not alone. So subscribe and stay with me through the rest. On the 28th of May, 2016, the Cincinnati Zoo in Ohio was having an ordinary day. Families moved between exhibits in the late spring warmth. A young child made it past the barrier and into the gorilla habitat, ending up in the moat area of the enclosure. Suddenly, the careful separation between human and animal was gone. Video and eyewitness reports captured what no safety plan ever wanted to see: a small child inside the space, and Harambe moving through the area with the child present. For zoo staff, this became an impossible situation measured in moments. A 17-year-old male. Zoo officials defended the decision as necessary to protect the child, and the incident was reviewed by authorities and dissected endlessly in zoological safety discussions. The experts who weighed in largely returned to the same hard point. A tranquilizer is not instant. A drugged gorilla can react unpredictably in the seconds before it takes effect, and with a child within reach, those seconds were a risk the staff were not willing to take. Within the cruel logic of that moment, the choice they made was the one that prioritized the human life. The irony is built into the structure of the place. The barriers at a zoo exist to protect people and animals alike. On the 20th of March, 2005, an unusual visitor appeared in the waters of Seattle. A female walrus, later known as Nola, had come into the city's waterfront and canal area, far from the open ocean where a walrus belongs. She was a wild animal, enormous and out of place, and her arrival in an urban waterway was the kind of event that draws a crowd almost instantly. Nola was not there because of any human plan. She had simply ended up in the wrong place, a large marine mammal stranded in the heart of a city. But once she was there, what happened to her was shaped entirely by people. Word spread. Onlookers gathered along the water to watch her, drawn by the rare sight of a creature that few of them would ever see in the wild. For a while, she was a spectacle, a wonder, a story to tell. The reality of her situation was far less hopeful. A stranded walrus in an urban canal is a difficult, dangerous animal to help. She was large, stressed, and in a setting that made any rescue enormously complicated. As the response unfolded, wildlife officials had to weigh the risk she posed against the odds of moving her safely. In the end, the decision was made that she had become too dangerous to approach. Rather than continue trying to rescue her, officials euthanized her. The immediate aftermath was grief mixed with anger. Nola's death sparked criticism and soul-searching over how wildlife rescues are handled in urban settings. People who had gathered to admire her now had to absorb that the encounter had ended with her death. The case became a difficult example of what happens when a wild animal collides with a city, surrounded by attention but short on real options. The official response emphasized the genuine dangers. A walrus that size, stressed and cornered in a populated area, presented real risks, both to itself and to the people around it. But later reporting framed the case in a harder light, as a failure of rescue logistics, a tragic collision between public fascination and the practical limits of what could be done for a large wild animal in the wrong place. The irony is quiet and uncomfortable. Nola was never short of human interest. She was watched, photographed, and cared about by a crowd of people who wanted nothing more than to see her safe and free. And yet all that attention could not translate into a rescue. A stranded wild animal died in the middle of a public spectacle, with people all around her who would have helped if only the situation had allowed it. Nola's name endured in Seattle as a kind of cautionary memory, a reminder of how thin the gap can be between fascination and tragedy when the wild wanders into the human world. This case is not a single moment with a single name, but a pattern that wildlife agencies across North America and Europe have documented again and again, always with the same ending. It begins with something that looks like kindness, and finishes with a bear lying dead at the hands of the very people who were once charmed by it. The bear in these cases is wild, healthy, and naturally wary of people. That wariness is what keeps it alive. A bear that fears humans stays away from them, and a bear that stays away does not become a problem. Left to its own life, it forages, ranges, and avoids the towns and trails at the edges of its territory. The system that keeps it safe is its own instinct to keep its distance. The turn comes slowly, one hand out at a time. People feed the bear directly, or leave food where it can easily reach it, often out of curiosity, or for the thrill of a close photo. To the person tossing food, it feels harmless, even generous. But to the bear, every meal teaches a lesson. Humans mean food. There is no reason to be afraid. The fear that protected it begins to erode, replaced by association and approach. Over time, that habituated bear changes its behavior in ways that cannot be undone. It begins to come toward people. It approaches homes, vehicles, and property, expecting the food it has learned to find there. What was once a shy animal at the edge of the woods becomes a bear that walks into yards and town streets without hesitation, and at that point, it becomes a public safety concern that authorities cannot ignore. The aftermath is brutally consistent. Once a bear has lost its fear of humans, it usually cannot be safely relocated. Move it somewhere new and it carries the same learned behavior with it, approaching the next set of people just as boldly. Wildlife officials are frequently left with no acceptable option but to kill the animal. The bear that learned to trust people is destroyed because of that trust. The findings from wildlife agencies leave little room for doubt. They consistently identify human feeding as the root cause in these cases. The phrase that recurs in their guidance is blunt and deliberate, that a fed bear is a dead bear, because the chain from handout to habituation to destruction is so reliable that it can be predicted in advance. The irony is the cruelest kind. People feed wildlife because they imagine it as a gift, a moment of connection, a harmless gesture of goodwill. But for the bear, that gift is the first step toward its own death. The animal does nothing wrong. It simply learns exactly what people taught it, and then it is killed for having learned it. Of all the deaths in this story, this is the one that repeats most quietly, year after year, town after town. In 2014, at the Cincinnati Zoo in Ohio, a Susi was part of a captive breeding program, a careful, expensive, long-term effort to give the species a future when its survival in the wild had grown impossibly fragile. She represented hope. Every animal in that program carried the weight of an entire species' chances, watched over by people who had devoted their working lives to pulling the Sumatran rhino back from the edge. The turn was medical, not human. Susi developed iron overload disease, a condition that builds up over time and proved devastating despite intensive veterinary care. The people responsible for her did everything within reach of modern conservation medicine. They could not save her. She died, was treated as a major setback for Sumatran rhino conservation. In a species with so few individuals, the loss of even one breeding-age female is a serious blow. Her death was mourned not only as the end of one animal's life, but as a step backward in a fight that was already being lost. The veterinary findings identified iron overload disease as the cause of death. It was not negligence, not a barrier that failed, not a crowd that pressed too close. It was a complication that the best available care could not overcome, if because of human effort, the product of a deliberate attempt to undo the damage that earlier human behavior had done to her species. But the broader collapse was too far advanced, and the difficulty of breeding and sustaining these rhinos too great for that effort to guarantee her survival. The rescue could not outrun the crisis it was built to fix. Susi's death is a different kind of tragedy from the others here. There is no villain in it, only the hard limit of what good intentions and expert care can achieve once a species has been pushed too close to the end. She was a life people fought for, and lost anyway. Some animals die not from malice and not from any plan, but from a few minutes of curiosity. In coastal incidents documented by local news outlets and wildlife agencies, including cases on United States beaches, a shark has been pulled from the water by people who wanted a close photo or a trophy-style moment, and the encounter has ended with the animal dead. The shark in these cases is a wild predator in its own element, perfectly suited to the water and entirely dependent on it. Some of these animals belong to protected species, given legal protection precisely because their numbers cannot afford casual losses. In the water, the shark is no danger to anyone on the shore. It is simply where it is meant to be, doing what it has always done. The turn happens fast and is driven entirely by people. The shark is hauled onto the beach, out of the water, and handled by bystanders. For the people involved, it is a thrill, a rare chance to stand beside something powerful and wild and capture it on camera. But for the shark, being removed from the water is catastrophic. Out of its element, it cannot breathe properly, and the stress and physical injury of being dragged ashore and handled begin to do their damage almost immediately. The aftermath is the part the photographers rarely anticipated. The shark, alive when it was taken from the water, dies from the stress and injury caused by the encounter. The trophy moment is over in minutes, and the animal does not recover from it. What was meant to be a memory becomes a death. Wildlife officials who responded to these incidents condemned the behavior plainly. Local agencies and news reporting emphasized the same crucial fact, that the animal was alive when it was taken from the water and died as a direct result of human interference. The case is used, again and again, to illustrate how quickly curiosity can kill a wild creature that posed no threat at all. The irony is stark. The shark was not attacking anyone. It was not a danger that had to be neutralized. The photo itself was the danger. The act of staging the picture, of lifting the animal out of the only environment it can survive in, was the thing that killed it. There was no conflict to resolve. Only a wild animal removed from the water so that people could stand beside it, and a death that served no purpose whatsoever. It is one of the simplest tragedies in this story, and one of the most avoidable. The shark needed nothing from anyone except to be left in the water. Instead, it was taken out of it for a few seconds of attention, and that was enough to end its life. On the 1st of September, 1914, at the Cincinnati Zoo in Ohio, a single bird died, and with her, an entire species ended forever. Her name was Martha, and she was the last known passenger pigeon on Earth. No one set out to kill Martha that day. She died of old age in captivity. But her death was the final note in a long human story, the quiet end of a species that people had already destroyed. To understand the weight of Martha's death, you have to understand what the passenger pigeon once was. It was among the most abundant birds the continent had ever known, flying in flocks so vast that they were said to darken the skies for hours as they passed. They numbered in the billions. The idea that such a bird could ever disappear would have seemed absurd to anyone watching those endless flocks overhead. The turn was not sudden. It played out over decades. The passenger pigeon was hunted on an enormous scale, and its forest habitat was destroyed as the land was cleared and settled. Bird by bird, flock by flock, the unimaginable abundance was whittled down. Historical accounts consistently identify overhunting and habitat loss as the causes of the species' collapse. A bird that had darkened the sky was reduced, over the course of a human lifetime, to a handful of survivors, and then to one. That one was Martha. By the end, she was alone, the only passenger pigeon left anywhere in the world, living out her days in captivity with no others of her kind. When she died on that September day in 1914, the species did not merely decline or grow rare. It was finished. There would never be another passenger pigeon. In the aftermath, Martha became one of the clearest symbols of extinction caused by human behavior. Her death was not abstract. It had a date, a place, and a name. She gave a face to a kind of loss that is usually too gradual and too large to grasp. The slow erasure of a species, distilled into the death of a single bird in a single cage. The irony of Martha's story is almost too large to hold. A species so numerous that it once seemed infinite was reduced to one individual, and then to none, by the actions of people who could not imagine that something so abundant could ever run out. The sky-darkening flocks and the lone bird in the Cincinnati Zoo were separated by only a few decades of human appetite. Martha's preserved body became a memorial, and her story endures as a warning written into history. She did not die from a single mistake on a single day. She died because, across years and across a continent, a great many ordinary human choices added up to an ending that no one had meant to cause, but everyone had helped to make. The last of her kind, she carried the whole weight of that loss alone. Pedro Ruiz III was 22 years old, living in Minnesota. And like a lot of young people in 2017, he wanted to make something that people would watch. He and his girlfriend, Mona Lisa Perez, were building a presence online together. They posted clips of their lives, their relationship, their jokes. They were a young couple with a child on the way, and the channel was part of the future they were imagining. The idea that ended his life, same rocks that gave way beneath her. Her death became a widely shared warning across India about the specific danger of filming at scenic edges during the monsoon, when the very conditions that make a place photogenic make it lethal. Timothy Wilkes, for the last story, returned to the kind of case that defined this whole subject in the public imagination, and consider once more what ties them together through the lens of the one that shook the most people. Across these stories, the same shape keeps appearing, and nowhere is it clearer than in the way an ordinary couple. On the 16th of March, 2002, 13-year-old Brittany Nicole Cecil sat in the lower bowl of Nationwide Arena in Columbus, Ohio. It was a birthday treat. She was there with her father, a middle school student and a hockey fan, getting to watch her sport up close the Columbus Blue Jackets against the Calgary Flames, the cold air off the ice, the roar of the crowd, the seats behind one of the goals where the action is fastest and feels closest ordinary day can turn. Dr. Hitoshi Christopher Nikaido was 35 years old, a walk together, errands, the kind of afternoon nobody thinks to remember because there should have been a sloping field. The health and safety executive was informed, given the agricultural safety questions involved. The late nights, the endless miles of road that claim so many careers and lives died on a quiet lane near his home, struck by a bale of hay. How extraordinarily unusual it was for a hay bale to strike a moving vehicle. It was unusual. It was also, for one man on one ordinary afternoon, absolute. In October 2024, in Lauren or near the property was caught by a strong gust and blown over. As it came down, it struck Lucas, crushing him and causing fatal injuries. Emergency services were called, but he died from the trauma. Local authorities investigated and determined the tree's fall was weather-related. According to the account of the case, investigators determined that Schwartz was playing with a friend in his backyard when the tree was blown over by gusty winds, striking him and causing fatal injuries. The available record does not detail whether the tree had any prior problem, rot, disease, any visible warning. What was cited as the principal factor was the wind itself, a brief period of high gusts that took down a tree at the exact moment a child stood beneath it. The whole community mourned. A boy in his own yard, on an ordinary October day, with a friend at his side, and an everyday environmental hazard that almost never turns lethal did. The case became a quiet reminder of the danger that high winds can pose, and of the importance of keeping an eye on trees that might be unstable near where people live. But no reminder softens the shape of it. There was no risk taken, no rule broken, no place he should not have been. He was home. In 2024, at a private home in Indiana, 5 members of one family were doing the most ordinary thing imaginable on a warm day, cooling off in their backyard pool. 3 of them were children, 2 were adults. It was an everyday afternoon of relaxation. An exposed electrical wire was able to make contact with the pool water. And once that happened, the water itself became electrified. All 5 swimmers were shocked. Emergency services were called. The incident was treated as a deadly accident. A family afternoon turned into a catastrophe in an instant, with no warning at all. Police determined the cause. A wire on the pool pump had been pinched, causing the protective cover to break, after which the exposed wire made contact with the pool water and shocked the 5 swimmers. It was investigated as a tragic accident rooted in electrical system failure, not any kind of wrongdoing. The deeper lesson sits in how preventable it was. Electrical codes and manufacturer instructions for pool equipment place enormous emphasis on grounding, bonding, and properly enclosing every wire near water, precisely because water and electricity together are so unforgiving. A single pinched wire, the kind of small fault that can develop quietly over time in any piece of home equipment, was all it took. A backyard pool, a symbol of family fun and summer ease, became deadly because of a fault no one in the water could see or feel until it was too late. The danger was not in the deep end. It was in the wiring of a machine humming quietly beside it. Gail Humphrey was 44 years old, a dental hygienist who spent her working days reminding other people to take care of themselves. On the day this story turns, she had come to a commercial zip line and rope course facility in the United States for the simplest of reasons. She wanted a day out, a high-speed ride down a cable, the rush of open air, the kind of small thrill that thousands of people pay for every weekend and walk away from grinning. At the staging area, a staff member named Tyler did exactly what he was trained to do. He offered her a helmet. At this facility, helmets were not a suggestion. They were mandatory, written into the safety and insurance rules that governed every single rider who clipped onto that course. Tyler held one out and explained why she needed it. Gail declined. According to the account, she was dismissive of the requirement, confident she didn't need it, so she stepped onto the course bareheaded, and the helmet stayed behind. During one of her runs, something went wrong. She lost control and struck her head, either against a structural element of the course or during a high-impact fall. The injury happened in seconds, the way these injuries always do. On the ground, she was seriously hurt. Staff moved fast, called emergency medical services, and she was transported by ambulance to a regional medical center. She did not die at the scene. She held on through the evening and into the night. But the following morning, Gail Humphrey died in hospital from a severe subdural hematoma, bleeding between the brain and its outer covering, the classic and brutal result of major head trauma. When investigators arrived to document what had happened, they found something quietly devastating. The helmet Tyler had offered her, the one piece of equipment that might have changed everything, was still sitting on the bench in the staging area. It had never been worn. It hadn't moved. The facility's records confirmed what the bench already said out loud. Helmet use was required by written policy for every participant, specifically to reduce the risk of the exact injury that killed her. There was a rule, and there was a person standing right in front of her holding the means to follow it. The distance between protection and catastrophe was the length of an outstretched arm and a single word. What makes Gail's story stay with you is how ordinary the setting was. This wasn't a remote mountain or an extreme expedition. It was a place built for fun, staffed by people whose entire job was keeping riders safe. The safeguard worked exactly as designed, right up until the moment it was set aside. If you want more of these told the same careful way, do subscribe and stay with me, because what ties them together is closer to home than it looks. Donna Shakar was 41, an office manager at a dental practice in the United States, the kind of person who kept a busy workplace running and knew her way around a medical setting. In 2020, she decided she wanted cosmetic facial fillers. What she didn't want was the price. Licensed injectors quoted her costs she thought were too high. So Donna went looking for something cheaper, and through social media and word of mouth she found an unlicensed home injector who would do it for far less. The goal was simple and relatable. Look a little different, spend a little less. The injection happened in a non-medical setting. Within a day, Donna's face began to swell. There was redness, pain, and warmth at the injection site, the textbook warning signs of an infection taking hold. Worried, she contacted her own regular dermatologist for advice. Her dermatologist listened to the description and was alarmed. This sounded like cellulitis or a deep, soft tissue infection, and Donna needed to be seen that same day, in person, urgently. The warning could not have been clearer. Donna refused. She said she was too busy. Then she went further, accusing her dermatologist of inventing a reason to bill her for a visit, framing a genuine medical emergency as a money-making scheme. Over the next 4 days, the swelling hardened and a visible abscess formed along her cheek and jawline. Donna worked in a dental office, surrounded by colleagues who recognized infection when they saw it, and they raised their concerns too. She waved them off, insisting it was just filler migration, taking nothing stronger than ibuprofen for the pain. Then her body crossed a line it could not come back from. She became acutely ill. Paramedics were called and found her in septic shock, her blood pressure low, her heart racing, her mental state altered. She was rushed to the ICU and treated with intravenous antibiotics and fluids. It was too late. Roughly 14 hours after admission, Donna Shakar died of septic shock and multi-organ failure, caused by a facial infection that had spread through her tissue while she insisted nothing was wrong. The medical workup told a straightforward story. A severe soft tissue infection at the injection site had spread into the surrounding face. The original cause traced back to the unlicensed injector and the non-sterile setting. But the thing that turned a treatable infection into a fatal one was the 4-day delay, the warning she heard clearly and chose to disbelieve. The cruelest detail is how much help surrounded her. She had a licensed dermatologist on the phone giving a specific, urgent warning. She had medically trained co-workers at her desk every day. As one summary of her case put it, she had a professional giving her a clear warning and turned it into a conspiracy about money. The infection that killed her would very likely have responded to treatment if she had walked in the day she was first told to. Renee was a middle-aged professional who ran her own client-based business in the United States. She was used to being the one in charge, the person who set her own schedule and answered to no one. That self-direction had built her career. In a hospital ward, it would cost her life. Renee went in for a routine laparoscopic gallbladder removal, a common operation to resolve biliary pain. The plan was simple: have the surgery, recover, and get back to her clients and her busy life as quickly as possible. She was admitted afterward for standard postoperative observation, the ordinary watchfulness that follows any operation. At first, she was stable. Then, later that day, things shifted. She began complaining of increasing abdominal pain, discomfort, and a growing sense of feeling unwell. The nursing staff and surgical team did what they were supposed to do. They recommended continued monitoring, pain control, and observation for possible complications, including bleeding. Renee grew impatient. Described as resistant to authority and accustomed to being in control, she insisted the team was overreacting. She downplayed her own symptoms and kept circling back to the same thing: her clients, her schedule, her need to leave. When staff recommended keeping her overnight because of her pain and her vital signs, she demanded to be discharged against medical advice. The hospital followed its process. Staff explained the risks plainly, documented that she understood them, and had her sign the against medical advice paperwork. By the account, she signed it without reading it. At around 6:30 in the evening, against her physician's direct advice to stay for monitoring, Renee walked out. Overnight at home, the complication that the team had been watching for arrived. A small clip at the cystic artery had failed, a recognized but serious risk of gallbladder surgery, and she was bleeding internally. The pain worsened. At some point, she collapsed from the internal hemorrhage. Emergency services were called, but by the time paramedics reached her, she was beyond saving. Renee died from ongoing internal bleeding caused by that clip failure, the exact kind of complication that hospital observation exists to catch. The clinical review afterward was clear. The bleeding was a known risk. Her early symptoms and pain were precisely why the team wanted her to stay inpatient. Leaving against medical advice removed her from monitoring and delayed any chance of catching the bleed until it was far too late, until she was already on the floor at home. There is a hard irony built into the very paperwork she signed. The against medical advice process exists for one reason: to warn a patient, in writing, that they are taking a serious risk by leaving. It is the system's last attempt to make someone stop and reconsider. Renee not only overrode the advice of every professional around her, she signed away that final safeguard without reading the words on the page. The instinct for control that had served her so well in business became, in a hospital bed, the thing that put her past the reach of the people trying to keep her alive. After a stretch of heavy rain, a low-lying section of road in a flood-prone part of the United States had been closed. This is one of the most ordinary scenes in American life after a storm. Barricades across the lane, signs warning of high water, a detour that costs a few extra minutes. The driver in this story was an adult woman whose name was not recorded. Her goal was nothing dramatic. She was trying to get where she was going, probably home, using a road she knew well. The closure stood in her way, and the detour was an irritation. She reached the barricades and made a choice. Reportedly frustrated and confident she knew the road, she drove around them and entered the flooded section. What looked like a manageable stretch of standing water was anything but. In flash flood conditions, water is routinely deeper and faster than it appears from the surface, and it hides how much force it carries. Her vehicle was overwhelmed. It either stalled and began taking on water or was pushed off the roadway by the current. She called and yelled for help as the car filled and went under. Rescuers were dispatched, but the same floodwaters that trapped her made reaching her enormously difficult. Before they could pull her to safety, she drowned in or near the submerged vehicle. First responders later recovered her body from the flooded car or downstream from where she had entered the water. Law enforcement and highway reports confirmed the barricades and warning signs had been in place when she drove around them. The depth and the strength of the current made the crossing lethal. exactly as official messaging has warned for years. The figures behind that messaging are sobering. Even a foot or two of moving water is enough to sweep a vehicle off the road. The irony here is layered, because she didn't bypass a single warning. She passed physical barricades, which exist precisely so no one can claim they didn't know, and posted signs, and the broader public safety rule summed up in 4 words: turn around, don't drown. That campaign exists for this exact scenario: the familiar road, the few minutes saved, the water that looks lower than it is. Officials used her death to remind the public of it again. What this case shows so plainly is how little it takes. There was no recklessness in the rest of her day, no spectacular gamble. There was a detour, a moment of impatience, and a stretch of water that did not care how well she knew the road. The woman in this story was a homeowner in the United States whose name was not recorded. She lived in a single-family home, in a place she had made her own over years, with habits she had no intention of changing. For months, and possibly years, people had been trying to warn her. Neighbors noticed hazardous conditions. At various points, maintenance people or fire safety inspectors raised the alarm about blocked exits, smoke detectors that didn't work, multiple extension cords daisy-chained together, and unattended space heaters. These are the quiet, accumulating dangers that fire departments see again and again. She didn't see it that way. She dismissed the concerns as nitpicking, called the safety rules overblown, and fell back on the line so many of us use about our own routines. She'd always done it this way, and nothing bad had ever happened. Then, one night, something did. A fire broke out, and by the reported account it likely started from exactly the kind of hazard she'd been warned about: an overloaded outlet or a heater too close to something that would burn. The fire spread fast through the structure. Without working smoke detectors to wake her in time and without clear exits to escape through, she became trapped inside. Firefighters responded, but the dense smoke and the speed of the fire made rescue desperately hard. She was found unresponsive in the home and died from smoke inhalation, burns, or both. When fire officials reviewed what had happened, they pointed to code violations and previously documented hazards as contributing factors. Their reports noted earlier visits, occasions on which they had urged her to correct specific dangers. The origin of the fire lined up with those very hazards, the overloaded cord or the unsafe heating setup she'd been told about. The painful symmetry of this case is hard to miss. She had been told, in concrete terms, what might kill her in a fire: non-working alarms, blocked exits, overloaded circuits. Each of those was named to her as a risk, and each of those was present on the night the fire came. The rules she dismissed as pointless, mandatory detectors and basic fire code, were the same rules designed to give her 2 things she didn't have when it mattered: a warning while she could still move, and a way out. Hers is the kind of death that rarely makes headlines, the slow danger that builds in the background of an ordinary home until a single spark finds it. This case is the hardest of all to tell, and the responsibility for it rests entirely on one person who was not the victim. The woman at its center was not named. She was an adult living at home, in the United States, in an abusive relationship. Over time, the people around her tried to reach her. Neighbors and acquaintances noticed the repeated disturbances and the injuries. Police responded to domestic calls more than once. On at least one of those occasions, officers and victim advocacy personnel urged her to file charges, to accept shelter, to follow through with protective orders, the formal steps designed to put distance between a victim and the danger. Each time, she declined. She minimized how serious it was. She turned down restraining orders or reconciled with her partner, even after being told explicitly that the situation was escalating. According to the account, every opportunity to accept help was met with the sense that outsiders were overreacting or meddling, that the people knocking on her door didn't understand. The professionals who deal with domestic violence understand it better than anyone. They know that repeated police calls and escalating incidents are among the strongest predictors of a lethal outcome. She was warned of that pattern by people who recognized exactly where it was heading. Eventually, during another violent incident, her partner assaulted her with fatal force. Emergency services were called, but she died of her injuries either at the scene or shortly after reaching hospital. The partner was arrested and faced serious charges. The investigative picture, as described, showed a clear and tragic shape, a pattern of escalating violence, repeated law enforcement involvement, and documented offers of shelter, legal support, and safety planning, all of which were declined. The conclusion was that earlier acceptance of those interventions might have changed the ending, though the guilt for the killing belongs solely to the man who carried it out. The hardest irony in this story is also the most human. She feared the upheaval of leaving more than she feared the danger of staying, even as the people around her could see the lethal risk closing in. That fear is not foolishness. It is one of the most documented and devastating realities of abusive relationships. Her story is not a lesson in blame. It is a reminder of how hard it can be to take the hand that's offered, and why the people who keep offering it matter so much. There is a second cosmetic case in this dossier, and it echoes Donna Shakar's so closely that the repetition itself is the warning. The woman here was not named. She was an adult client who wanted a minimally invasive cosmetic procedure, fillers or Botox, and she was deeply cost-sensitive and skeptical of medical warnings about complications. Unlike Donna, she went to a licensed professional in a proper clinical setting. The procedure was done correctly, and she was given a standard post-procedure briefing, the kind every careful clinic provides. It included the warning signs of infection and clear instructions. If these symptoms appear, call us or come in. Within days, the symptoms appeared: increasing redness, swelling, warmth and pain at the injection site, exactly the picture she'd been told to watch for. Clinic staff, reached by phone, strongly advised her to come back in for an in-person evaluation and possible antibiotics. She declined. And the reason she gave is the chilling part, because it was almost word for word the suspicion that killed Donna. She insisted the staff were just trying to bill another visit, and said she could manage with over-the-counter remedies. As her condition worsened, the clinic didn't give up. Staff left follow-up messages, emphasizing the real risk of cellulitis and sepsis if she stayed away. The warnings grew more urgent as the danger grew more real. She kept refusing. Eventually, the infection spread through her body, and she arrived at an emergency department in septic shock. Despite aggressive hospital treatment, intravenous antibiotics, fluids, and supportive care, she died of sepsis and multi-organ failure that had started with an untreated infection at a single injection site. The clinic's documentation showed she had been given both written and verbal instructions about infection signs, and that staff had strongly recommended prompt follow-up the moment those signs appeared. The medical cause of death was sepsis secondary to a soft tissue infection left untreated for days. The irony writes itself because the clinic already had. The post-procedure advice she dismissed described, almost line for line, exactly what happened to her. It named the symptoms she would develop and told her precisely what to do when they did. Her belief that the follow-up was only about extra billing led her to skip the one visit that could have saved her, the same fatal misreading that had taken Donna Shakar. 2 women, 2 clinics, the same suspicion, the same ending. Patrice was a middle-aged woman with a heart condition she knew about. She had atrial fibrillation, an abnormal heart rhythm that raises the risk of stroke and sudden death, and she had received medical counseling about it, including guidance to limit her exertion and follow her treatment. What's striking about Patrice's story is how ordinary, even admirable, her goal was. She wanted to be healthy. On the day she died, She was out in an outdoor setting in the United States, exercising hard, pushing herself, doing the very thing we're all told to do more of. But for a heart in atrial fibrillation, intense exertion is not a simple good. The counseling she'd been given existed precisely because her heart was vulnerable, under heavy strain. On that day, she engaged in vigorous activity anyway, despite her condition and the advice she'd been given to moderate it. In the middle of that exertion, her heart faltered. She suffered a sudden cardiac event and collapsed without warning. Whoever was with her or nearby called emergency services immediately, and the response was fast, paramedics reaching her within about 6 minutes. They began resuscitation. Despite everything they did, and despite how quickly they arrived, she could not be revived. Patrice was pronounced dead at the scene. The cause was a malignant cardiac arrhythmia during heavy exertion, with her known atrial fibrillation raising her baseline risk and setting the stage. By the case analysis, she had not fully followed the activity restrictions and medical guidance designed to reduce exactly that exertional danger. The irony in Patrice's death is the gentlest and the saddest of all the stories here. She didn't die doing something reckless in the ordinary sense. She died trying to take care of herself, doing the activity most associated with health and long life: atrial fibrillation. Counseling tends to stress the same handful of things: medication adherence, monitoring, and moderated exertion. And it is that last piece, the one that asks a person to hold back at the very moment they feel strongest, that is hardest to accept. The advice she set aside was meant to protect her at the precise instant of maximum strain, and that was the instant her heart gave way. Out of all of these, hers is the one that complicates the easy lesson, because the warning she didn't follow asked her to do less of something good. The thin line we keep returning to runs right through the middle of an ordinary jog. If these stayed with you, the stories in the next video are even harder to make sense of. You can click the video on your screen to keep watching right now. Until the next one, take care of yourself and take care of each other.